Petri Wine brings you Basil Rathbone and Nigel Bruce in the new adventures of Sherlock Holmes. The Petri family, the family that took time to bring you good wine, invites you to listen to Dr. Watson tell us another exciting adventure he shared with his old friend, that master detective, Sherlock Holmes. You know, the lives of Holmes and Watson were not always filled with action. They spent many a quiet evening at home in Baker Street, discussing the problems of the world over a glass of port. You know, it seems that no wine is more expressive of friendship and hospitality than port. And I'm sure there's no port wine more enjoyable than Petri California port. Try a good glass of Petri port after dinner some evening, or any time you get together with your friends. You'll love the rich, ruby red color of that Petri port. You'll love its smoothness and full body, its remarkable and wonderful flavor. A flavor that comes straight from the heart of luscious, hand-picked grapes. Serve that Petri port alone, or serve it together with cake or cookies or with fruit. Yes, and serve it proudly. You can, because the name Petri is the proudest name in the history of American wines. And now I'm sure our old friend Dr. Watson's expecting us. Let's tap on his study door.
Come in.
Good evening, Doctor.
Good evening, Mr. Bartell. Come over here by the fire. I was just having a cup of coffee. Would you care to join me?
Thanks, that'd be nice.
It'll prevent you falling asleep during my story tonight.
There's no chance of that, Doctor. From the hints you gave us last week, it sounded like quite a story. It began in a circus in Paris, you told us?
Yes, my boy, the circus. A colorful world of sawdust and spangles. A world, Mr. Bartell, that I may tell you confidentially, always held an irresistible fascination for me when I was a youngster.
Me too, Doctor.
In fact, when I was 8 years old, I fell desperately in love with a lady bareback rider. A stunning creature who wore pink silk tights with gold sequins on them. Unfortunately, my mother caught me writing her proposal of marriage, and I'm afraid that, that's another story, and one that you probably wouldn't find very interesting.
I'm sure I would, Doctor, but I think it would be safer to stick to your Sherlock Holmes story.
Yes, you're probably right, my boy. Well, it was a winter in the 1890s, and Holmes and I were in Paris. On our second day there, Holmes suggested we attend that night's performance of the Cirque Royale. Needless to remark, I was delighted, Mr. Bartell. And shortly after 9 o'clock that night, I found myself seated beside Holmes in a box near the ringside. It was an incredibly vivid scene, even for that city of color and light. The gay costumes of the women and the gaudy trappings of the ringmasters and clowns looked like a giant kaleidoscope under the blazing glare of the arc lamps. As we sat there, a brass band nearby blared forth some popular music of the day, and yet he didn't appear to be enjoying himself. And so I leaned across and touched his arm.
What is it, Watson?
Well, you're very quiet, Holmes. Aren't you having a good time?
A good time, I suppose, old chap. I was just wondering where Mr. Edwards is.
Mr. Edwards? Who's he?
An extremely distinguished client who was to meet us in this box at 9 o'clock.
Client. So this little excursion was on business after all. Yes, I might have known it.
No worry, old fellow. In your case, I think you'll be able to combine quite a little pleasure with the business.
Well, can't you be a little more explicit, Holmes?
Shh. Here comes the ringmaster.
Mesdames et messieurs, j'ai l'honneur de vous présenter ce soir la grande vedette du cirque, Mademoiselle Gisèle Girondet, équestrienne incomparable.
Giselle Gironde, yes, I've heard of her. She's a bareback rider, isn't she, Holmes?
Honest in France, old fellow. She also has quite a reputation as a femme fatale. 3 duels have been fought over her. A young English officer in the Grenadier Guards committed suicide last year because of her. And a famous French banker is at present languishing in prison. because her extravagances drove him to appropriate funds that did not belong to him. Yes, Watson, she's an extremely colourful personality.
You know, Holmes, it's a funny thing. When I was 8 years old, I fell violently in love with a lady bareback rider. She wore pink silk tights with golden sequins on them, but unfortunately...
Here she is, old fellow. Here she is.
Holmes, she's exquisite. Look at the way she's jumping from the back of one horse to the other. Sheer poetry of motion.
The lady appeals to you, Watson.
By George, yes, indeed she does. In fact, Holmes, I don't mind telling you that if I weren't a married man and a poor man...
you'd like to court the lady, eh?
Yes, I should
Excellent,
indeed.
old fellow, excellent. That's the very reason for our attendance at the
Well,
circus.
what in heaven's name are you talking about, Holmes?
Ah, there you are. Good evening, Mr. Edwards.
Holmes, my dear fellow, how are you? I haven't seen you since that little affair at Windsor Castle when Mother...
Excuse me, sir. I am Mr. Mycroft, and this is my friend, Sir William Nigel.
Sir William Nigel?
Of course. And I am Mr. Edwards. We must respect each other's incognitos, eh? How'd you do, Sir William?
Well, I'm extremely honored to meet you, Your Royal, Mr. Edwards.
How'd you like Giselle? Isn't she a stunning creature?
Yes, indeed she is, sir.
The four of us to have supper together after the performance tonight, I understand, Mr. Edwards.
Well, unfortunately, I can't be there, Mycroft. There's some stupid affair at the embassy which I have to attend. We must postpone the dinner until tomorrow night.
Oh, very well, sir.
Come over to my hotel a little early and we can discuss the whole business. Personally, I think a lot of fuss is being made about nothing. Now, if you'll excuse me, gentlemen, I must go back and see Giselle for a moment and tell her that I can't keep our appointment for tonight. I'll see you tomorrow, Mycroft. Good night, Sir William.
Good night. Good night,
Good night, sir.
Et maintenant, pour votre plaisir, les frères Salini, les jongleurs internationaux.
Holmes, what's all this mystery? That wasn't Mr. Edwards, it was the Prince of...
Watson, please. Discretion, old fellow. Mr. Edwards, as you know, is extremely democratic. Too much so, possibly, when one considers his position and responsibilities. He's become quite seriously involved with Mademoiselle Giselle, the lady bareback rider who has just left the ring.
Oh, so that's it.
The Foreign Office, quite naturally, I suppose, is deeply concerned over the matter, and I've been entrusted with the delicate mission of protecting Mr. Edwards.
Oh, does Giselle Gironde know that his true identity, do you suppose?
That's the first thing that we have to find out. It's possible that she is simply captivated by having a rich Englishman at her feet. If, on the other hand, she knows who Mr. Edwards is, then we may be in for a great deal of trouble.
Yes, but how are you going to find that out?
By tempting her with a richer Englishman. And one with a title. That, my dear fellow, is why you are Sir William Nigel.
You mean that...
Your job, old
What?
fellow, is to do your utmost to steal Giselle Gironde from Mr. Edwards.
But, I don't even know the girl.
We shall remedy that defect in a few minutes. As soon as the performance is over, my dear chap, I shall take you to her dressing room and arrange an introduction.
I must say, Holmes, the backstage life at a circus is even more colourful than in the ring.
What makes you say that, old fellow?
Well, I just saw a pinhead having tea with a bearded lady while a sword swallower was standing behind him practicing his act.
Oh, hello. See that man standing talking to the girl in tights?
Yeah, attractive, isn't she?
The gentleman is Inspector Blarney of the French police, an old friend and a distant relative of mine. Blarney, how are you?
Ah, Holmes, mon cher ami, comment ça va?
No, Blarney, please. On this occasion, my name is Mycroft, if you don't mind, and this is my friend, Sir William Nigel.
How do you do, Inspector?
Enchanté, Sir William. Permit me to introduce Mademoiselle Yvette Marat.
How you do?
How do you do,
How do
madame?
you do?
What brings you behind the scenes at the circus, may I ask, mon cher Mycroft?
My friend Sir William is most anxious to make the acquaintance of Mademoiselle Gironde.
But of course, every man wishes to meet Giselle Gironde. Why not ask Vernet? He will present you to her. Ha! In not a way.
Oh, now, Yvette, chérie, do not begin that all over again.
You're in love with her. You have always been in love with her. I wish you were dead. Sometimes I think I could kill her myself.
Upon my soul, Inspector, she's a fiery little thing, isn't she?
Ah, ça c'est vrai, ça, Sir William. Many times I've told her that Giselle Girondet would never waste her time with a simple police inspector. She prefers a wealthy foreigner. But Yvette ne comprend pas. She does not understand and she does not believe.
Mademoiselle Marat was dressed in tights, Blarney. What does she do in the circus?
She walks the tightrope. She's
yes,
queen of the high wire. Mm-hmm. A charming and a talented girl, but a most jealous one.
Blarney, my distinguished friend Sir William Nigel is most anxious to meet Giselle Girondet. Will you introduce him? I should prefer not to appear on the matter at this stage.
Oh, mais certainement. I will take you to her dressing room. Please come with me, Sir William.
Right. I'll see you later, Holmes.
I'll be waiting for you, old chap. Good luck.
Hey, you're a lucky man, Sir William. Giselle has quite a penchant for the Englishmen. And when they are rich and have a title, I'm sure she finds them irresistible.
You really think so?
Oh, but of course. Ah, quel dommage that I'm only a poor policeman. Here we are.
Entrez.
Giselle, monsieur, permit me to present to you Sir William Nigel. He's a great admirer of yours.
Yes, indeed, madam.
Ah, Sir William Nigel. Come and sit here beside me, Sir William.
I shall leave you. Au revoir.
Sit closer. There. That is much more cozy, no?
It's very nice of you to see me, Mademoiselle Gironde.
Oh, don't be so formal, my Englishman. You may call me Giselle, and I shall call you... Let me see, I shall call you... Sir William, not... Willie! I shall call you Willie. You do not mind?
Mine? It's very delightful. Quite delightful, my dear. I was hoping perhaps that you'd care to have a little supper with me tonight, Giselle. So what about some oysters, a cold pheasant, and a bottle or two of Pomeranian Green 072? And you get to taste rather well, don't you think?
Oh, Willie, I can see you are a perfect host.
I don't know about that.
One moment, I get my cloak.
Well, you know, Giselle, it's a funny thing.
What is a funny thing, Willie?
When I was 8 years old, I fell violently in love with a lady bareback rider at a circus. History seems to be repeating itself.
Here.
Alfieri, do you no longer knock when you come to my door?
Who is this man?
My name is Nigel, Sir William Nigel, my good man, and who may you be?
I am Alfio Alfieri.
I am Alfio Alfieri. And what is he? A trainer of wild animals, an imbecile, Rathbone.
You must not speak to Alfio in that way. You belong to me. Send this stupid Englishman away.
Founded impudence.
Grossier. Belong to you. Giselle belong to no one.
Do I have to take my whip
Now,
to
put
you?
down that way. Put it down, you scoundrel.
Next time it will be your face,
You infernal blackguard. Raising your hand against a woman. Shocking.
Bravo! Monsieur Willie has knocked him down.
He certainly deserved it.
Oui. And you in turn deserve something, Willie.
Oh, what was that?
Come close, Willie, and I give it to you. A little kiss.
Oh, kiss? Thanks awfully.
You are so strong, so resolute, so brave.
Oh, it was nothing, my dear Giselle. Nothing at all. Here, more champagne, Gus. More champagne.
Oh, really?
Giselle,
Oui, Monsieur Edwards?
have a box for the opera tomorrow night. I was hoping that
Oh,
perhaps...
I'm sorry, Monsieur, but my time is occupied. I am showing the delightsome moment to mon cher Willie.
Mademoiselle aime mieux le collier de perles à 5 rangs ou celui à 3 rangs?
He says, which do I prefer, the 5-string color pearls or the 3-string color pearls? What does my Willie think?
So that you can't hang too many pearls on a pretty neck like yours. I'll take the 5-string collar, my good fellow.
You're doing splendidly, Watson, splendidly.
Yes, but Holmes, I felt such a blasted fool handing that jeweler fellow a check signed by Sir William Nigel. Are you quite sure that it'll be honored?
Don't worry, old fellow. Remember who our client is. Money is the least important concern in this matter. On with the masquerade, old fellow. On with the masquerade.
More champagne, garçon.
such a headstrong boy.
More champagne. Citadel, you dear little thing.
Oh,
Good evening, Blarney. Has Mademoiselle Girondet come in for the evening performance yet?
Yes, Monsieur Holmes. I escorted her to her dressing room half an hour ago. Monsieur Edwards is in there with her now. At last, it seems, she has use for a poor policeman. Last night, she found a threatening letter on her makeup table. Since then, she has been most grateful for my company.
A threatening letter, eh? Any idea who might have sent it?
Oh, yes, of course. I'm afraid I have, Monsieur Holmes. I told her to pay no attention. By the perfume of the notepaper, I recognized the sender. A jealous tightrope walker called Yvette Marat.
Oh.
Poor Yvette. She would make a very inferior criminal, I'm afraid. Still, Giselle asked me to stay outside her dressing room till the performance starts. You wish to see her?
Yes. Oh, good evening, Mr. Edwards.
Evening, Mycroft. Evening, Inspector Blarney.
Comment ça va, Monsieur Edwards?
Look here, Mycroft. I think this little game's gone far enough. Giselle has just refused another invitation of mine. Now, I know who Sir William Nigel is, and I swear I'll tell her.
Don't you think, sir, that the lady is hardly worth bothering about? Surely this whole incident with Sir William proves that she's a scheming little adventuress. A fictitious title and an apparently bottomless purse have shown her up in her true colors.
I could have told you the same thing without such an experiment, my friend.
Well, I suppose you're right, Mycroft. I've been a fool. An idiot who lets a pretty ankle turn his head. A conceited dolt.
Let us just say, monsieur, that you have been a man.
Good evening, sir. Good evening.
Good evening.
Just going back to see Giselle for a moment, I brought us these flowers for her. I'll be back in a jiffy.
Just a minute, Watson. I hate to dampen your ardor, old chap, but the masquerade is ended.
Ended? What do you mean it's
It is no
ended?
longer necessary for you to impersonate Sir William Nigel or to pay court to Giselle.
Oh, really? 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 Well, that's a great relief, sir. Great relief. I've hated the whole business.
Oh, yes, I'm sure you have. We appreciate the sacrifices that you've made, don't we, Sir Edward?
Yes, indeed.
Well, I must go back and see her once more, though. We had a rendezvous for tonight, and I must cancel it. A gentlemanly thing to do, you know. I won't be a minute.
Never have I seen a man more downcast. Obviously, with him, my dear Holmes, business was a pleasure. Alfieri, where are you going?
That Englishman. I just saw him go into Giselle's room.
To whom are you referring?
That man that called himself Sir William Nigel. 2 days ago, he struck me. I have to settle with him. No man may strike Alfieri.
Do not cause any more trouble, Alfieri. From what I've been told, you thoroughly deserved what happened to you.
Here he come now. You, English, you. Alfieri challenge you to a duel.
Holmes!
Watson, old chap, what is it? You're as white as a ghost.
It's Giselle.
What's wrong with her?
She's dead. She's lying there in her dressing room. Strangled.
Strangled? And only half an hour ago I spoke with her myself. Since then I've been standing in this corridor, guarding her door at her own request. Only 2 men have entered Giselle's dressing room since then. You, Monsieur Edwards, and you, Sir William Nigel.
What are you suggesting, Blarney?
I am suggesting nothing. I am stating that these 2 gentlemen are under arrest for suspicion of murder.
Dr. Watson's unusual story will continue in just a few seconds. Time I'd like to take to remind you that one wine that seems to be the outstanding favorite among the ladies is Petri California Muscatel. That's probably because, like a beautiful woman, Petri Muscatel is subtle and intriguing. Petri Muscatel is the color of burnished gold. And its flavor, well, it's the flavor of big, plump muscat grapes, picked by hand carefully and tenderly when they're just full of wonderful, delicious juice. If you want to show that you really know the wine that women prefer, serve Petri Muscatel. Serve it after dinner or later in the evening. It's wonderful. And why shouldn't it be? It's a Petri wine. Well, Dr. Watson, so you and the mysterious Mr. Edwards got yourselves arrested on suspicion of murder, huh?
Yes, Mr. Bartell. Holmes did everything in his power to persuade Inspector Verney to release us, but it was useless. And so, while Mr. Edwards and myself were languishing in detention cells at the local Sûreté, Holmes and the French inspector were examining the dressing room of the dead woman.
I'm sure, Inspector Verney, that being as keen a detective as you are, you must suspect the true identity of Mr. Edwards.
Of course, Monsieur Holmes. But that is the danger of incognitos. If he chooses to assume the identity of plain Monsieur Edwards, then he must run the risks of plain Monsieur
And
Edwards.
you're convinced that either he or my friend strangled Mademoiselle Girondet?
It is obvious.
Then I'll have to prove to you that they didn't. Let me examine the body again, will you? If she had been strangled by either of my friends, why would her body be lying here under the window? It's as far away from the door by which they left this room as possible.
That proves nothing.
No, but it's odd.
Giselle was a strong girl. There might easily have been a struggle. Perhaps she tried to get away through the window.
And yet there are no marks of violence on her throat. Just this piece of very fine cord that did its deadly work so cleanly. Cut with a knife.
Please do not remove the cord, Monsieur Holmes. The body has not yet been photographed.
Dear me, Verney, you're making it very hard for me, aren't you? You notice, of course, that the window is open.
Yes, but we have examined the snow outside. There were no footprints within 3 yards of the window. The murderer must have entered by the door that I was watching.
Yes, it would be hard, even for a professional acrobat to jump in. An acrobat? Verney, your young friend, Mademoiselle Yvette Marat, is a tightrope walker.
Yvette, but...
Yes, she certainly had a motive. She'd even sent a threatening letter. I heard her express hatred and jealousy for this dead woman. It's conceivable that she could enter a room by a window without leaving footprints in the snow. Where was she at the time of the murder?
I do not know. I was waiting for her in the corridor.
Then I suggest that we investigate her alibi at once. And after that, Inspector, I must pay a visit to the Sûreté. I don't want my friends to think that I've deserted them. Excuse me, sir.
Yes, Holmes.
I'm afraid it looks rather black. As I was telling you, Yvette Marat, the tightrope walker, was able to establish a completely satisfactory alibi. Verney still suspects you or Dr. Watson.
Well, that's ridiculous.
May I ask you a very straightforward question, sir?
Of course.
I can well understand that if you had gone into the dressing room and found the woman already murdered, you might easily be tempted to conceal the fact, to avoid a scandal involving your person. Will you swear to me, sir, on your true identity, that Giselle was alive when you left her?
She was, Holmes. I swear it.
Thank you, sir. That's all I wanted to know.
Holmes, I'm glad to see you. You know, I've been thinking. All this depends on Verney's evidence. But supposing he was the murderer? He told us that Giselle had turned him down, you know.
I'd thought of that, but Mr. Edwards swears that Giselle was alive when he left the room. And yet that means that Mr. Edwards... Oh, no, it's unthinkable.
Holmes, you're not suggesting... Holmes, if I thought that were possible, I'd confess to the murder myself. My life wouldn't matter if it had saved a scandal like that. Great Scott, it'd shatter the empire.
Dear old Watson, you shall not sacrifice yourself. You're as valuable a British institution as the Lion himself. No, my dear fellow. We shall never sacrifice you, not while my mind is still capable of... My mind? That's it. Thank you, Watson. You've given me the answer.
Holmes, what are you burbling
Be
about
patient,
now?
old fellow. In half an hour, you'll be out of this cell, and the real murderer will be in it.
Questions. Why must Alfieri answer so many questions?
Because he will not yet tell the truth. You murdered Giselle Girondet.
How many times I have to tell you I did not kill her? Why should I want to harm her?
Because you were jealous. Because she humiliated and tormented you.
But I was not in her dressing room. I've already proved that fact. Am I a magician that I can kill somebody without entering a room?
Alfieri, I know how you killed Giselle Girondet without its necessitating your entering this room.
And you're a smart man. Please to tell me.
I don't need to tell you. With the aid of Verney, I'll show you. Open the window, Alfieri.
What game is this?
Very well, then. I'll open the window myself. Put your head out. Come on. So, who do you see? Inspector Vernet standing 3 yards away, where you stood, and he's got your long training whip.
No!
Don't move. Stand there. The inspector hasn't your skill with a whip, but he wants to try a little experiment.
No, leave him alone!
All right, Vernet. I'm holding him.
Well, Mr. Edwards, I mean, well, sir, this is a pleasant change from a prison cell, isn't it?
It certainly is. Holmes, I can't tell you how grateful I am. I still don't quite understand how you did it.
Watson, in rather a roundabout way, was responsible for giving me the clue.
Oh, how was that, Holmes?
Well, on more than one occasion, old chap, I've had cause to deplore your rather florid style of writing. Tonight, I was very thankful for it. When I began to speak of the capabilities of my mind, suddenly I remembered a phrase of yours in which you referred to its whip-like rapidity and accuracy. That, of course, made me think of Alfieri, the animal trainer.
Exactly how did he kill the poor girl?
Well, sir, he stood outside the window, far enough away to leave no incriminating footprints. Called to Giselle, probably persuaded her to lean out, then snapped the whip around her neck, pulling it tight and strangling her.
And then I suppose he cut the cord and let the body fall back into the room.
Precisely, old fellow. We found a whipstock among his tackle, a whipstock from which the lash had been cut. The stub of lash left matched the cord around the dead girl's throat.
Amazing business. And I don't mind telling you, fellas, I'm very thankful to be through with it.
Yes, so am I, sir. In fact, I wouldn't be at all surprised if this whole incident cures me of my love of circuses.
Oh, I didn't know you had a predilection in that direction, Watson.
Oh, yes, sir. Yes, if you don't mind my saying so. When he was 8 years old, he fell in love with a lady bareback rider. Didn't you, Watson?
Indeed. What happened?
Well, sir, I don't remember her name, but she wore pink silk tights with golden sequins on them. And I wrote her a rather hot-headed letter. Unfortunately, my mother...
Well, Doctor, that was one of the most unusual stories you've ever told. And I might say you played a very prominent part in that case yourself.
Oh, I suppose I did at that, Mr. Bartell. Giselle was a beautiful girl. Beautiful.
Boy, I sure love that nickname she gave you. Wheelie.
Yes, I thought it was rather nice myself. Well, that is, I mean...
Don't get embarrassed over a nickname, Doctor. You should hear the nickname I had. Well, when I went to school, all the girls called me Bottles.
Bottles? Oh, I see, from Bartell. Bartell. Oh,
some nickname, like a prophecy.
What do you mean?
Well, they called me Bottles, and now that's what I like to talk about most. Bottles. Bottles of Petri wine.
Oh, I should have known.
And I'd like to talk about Petri wine because, as far as I'm concerned, it's the swellest wine that ever poured from a bottle. That's because the Petri family really knows how to make good wine. Well, they ought to. They've been making good wine ever since they started the Petri business way back in the 1800s. And since the Petri family has always personally owned and operated their business, they've been able to keep that fine art of winemaking right in the family, handing it on down from father to son, from generation to generation. So it's no wonder whenever you want a good wine, you want a Petri wine, because Petri took time to bring you good wine. Well, Dr. Watson, what new Sherlock Holmes story are you going to tell us about next week?
Well, now, next week, Mr. Bartell, I'm going to tell you of a strange adventure that Holmes and I had in the swampy fenlands of Norfolk. It concerns a gypsy encampment, a child that vanished, and a horrible death in the murky depths of a fearsome quagmire.
Tonight's Sherlock Holmes adventure was written by Dennis Green and Anthony Boucher and was suggested by an incident in the Sir Arthur Conan Doyle story, The Adventure of the Three Students. Music is by Dean Fostler. Mr. Rathbone appears through the courtesy of Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, and Mr. Bruce through the courtesy of Universal Pictures, where they are now starring in the Sherlock Holmes series. The Petri Wine Company of San Francisco, California, invites you to tune in again next week, same time, same station. Sherlock Holmes comes to you from our Hollywood studios. This is Harry Bartell saying goodnight for the Petri family. Petri Wine brings you Basil Rathbone and Nigel Bruce in the new adventures of Sherlock Holmes. The Petri family, the family that took time to bring you good wine, invites you to listen to Dr. Watson tell us another exciting adventure he shared with his old friend, that brilliant detective, Sherlock Holmes. And say, while you lend an ear to the good doctor, you'll get a lot of pleasure out of a glass of rich, ruby-red Petri California port. Just sit back and sip that Petri port leisurely. There's a wine that's just perfect after dinner. A wine that really goes with storytelling and conversation. Petri port is as rich in flavor as it is in color. And what a flavor. Full, hearty, and delicious. I can't think of a better way to express your hospitality than to offer your friends a glass of good Petri port. Serve that Petri port alone, or serve it with fruit or nuts, or with cake or sandwiches. No matter how you serve it, you can serve that Petri port proudly. Because the name Petri is the proudest name in the history of American wine. Well, here we are once again, keeping our weekly date with Dr. Watson. Good evening, Doctor.
Good evening, Mr. Bartell. Come in and join me. As you see, the puppies have been keeping your chair warm for you. Here, shove them off.
No, Doctor, I don't want to disturb them. They look much too comfortable. I'll sit over here, thanks.
There's tobacco in the jar beside you, cigarettes in the box, and some excellent port on the sideboard, so make yourself at home.
Thanks, Doctor. Are you all ready with tonight's new Sherlock Holmes adventure?
Yes, Mr. Bartell, though I'm afraid after all these years it's going to be a little hard for me to recapture for you the spirit of the story.
Last week you told us that a band of gypsies played a prominent part in the adventure.
Yes, they did indeed. And it was amid that colorful atmosphere that my story begins. It was in the autumn of 1890, and my old friend Sherlock Holmes had persuaded me to leave the comforts of my domestic fireside for a few days and to accompany him to the tiny village of Bragston-on-the-Marsh, in the heart of the Norfolk Fen district.
What took Sherlock Holmes up there, Doctor?
I'm afraid that at the time we left London, Mr. Bartell, he concealed his true purpose from me, saying only that he wanted friendly companionship and a strong right arm. Not until later did I learn that he was then on the track of one of the last clues that led to the confining of the Moriarty gang. But to get on with my story. We arrived at Bragston-on-the-Marsh and settled ourselves in the village inn. And after an early dinner, we strolled across the fields to the gypsy fair that was encamped nearby. It was a colorful sight, Mr. Bartell. Naphtha flares lighted a group of tents and caravans dotted round the edge of the marsh. And as gold-earring gypsy girls told fortunes and danced, swarthy gypsy men played on their violins the haunting melodies of their ancestors. We watched the sideshows for a few moments and then strolled towards the center of the gypsy encampment. It seems only like yesterday, Mr. Bartell, as Holmes turned to me and said...
Far cry from Baker Street, isn't it, Watson?
Yes, indeed. Just the same, Holmes, I'm convinced that you're not here purely for a holiday. You're on the trail of some criminal.
No, old chap, I'm on the trail of a clue. A clue, if I find it, may lead to the confounding of the Moriarty gang.
Holmes, can't you be a little more explicit? After all, I left my wife and my practice without asking any questions. Surely now we're up here, you could let me know what's afoot.
Very well, old fellow. I'm searching for a young gypsy by the name of Pyramus Hearn. He disappeared recently from London, and it's vital that I find him. I know that he can give me some essential information on our old enemy, Professor Moriarty.
And you're expecting to find the gypsy here?
I hope to get news of him, at least. His father, Jasper Hearn, is head of this particular encampment.
Well, why don't you ask if you can see him?
Just what I'm about to do, my dear fellow.
Well, here comes the gypsy. Now, I'll ask him.
All right. Oh, excuse me.
You speak to me, Gorgio?
Can you tell me where I may find Mr. Jasper Hearn?
What you want with Jasper Hearn?
I have a message for his son, Pyramus.
That is different. Jasper Hearn stands in the booth yonder. He is the Timberlangro.
Timberlangro?
He's the gentleman engaged in an interesting exhibition of skill involving 3 thimbles and a pea. What our American cousins refer to, I understand, as the old shell game. Let's stroll over there, shall we, old fellow?
If you would wish to talk to Jasper, it would be better to wait until he is finished. A Timberlangro needs all his wits about.
By Joe, look at that stunning girl in the tent over there. Who's she?
Her that is penning the rice duckering. That is Lydia Pentalangro. Excuse me, I shall tell Jasper to expect you late.
I can't understand a word they say, Holmes. Penning the what?
At last, my dear fellow, you can appreciate how I have felt at times. But at least their words are clear, even if the sense is not, to someone who is unfamiliar with the Romany language.
I don't know why you keep hinting that I'm hard to understand. No one else ever complains of it. In any case, what does penning the thingamabob mean?
Well, if I remember rightly, penning duckerin is telling fortunes. And from the sound of things, Lydia Pentalangro is not greatly pleased with the duckerin she penned.
No more. Lydia can tell no more fortune.
Come on, Watson. Let's see what the trouble is.
What do you mean? You must finish it.
But, Olive, my dear, if the young lady doesn't want to tell my fortune...
Rubbish. You crossed her palm with silver. She's taking money under false pretenses.
Here, I give you your silver back. Lydia has never taken money under false pretenses, nor has she told the future when she does not wish to. Goodbye to you.
The insolence of these gypsies is intolerable. If I had my way, they'd be run out of the county.
Now, my dear, don't get so excited. The poor girl's probably...
Good evening. Major Treadgold, isn't it?
Huh? I don't think I have the pleasure of your... Oh, dear me. It's Mr. Sherlock Holmes.
Yes, sir.
Well, bless my soul. Haven't seen you since that last meeting of the Geographical Society. Oh, I'd like you to meet my wife.
How do you do, Mrs. Treadgold?
How do you do?
This is my friend, Dr. Watson.
How do you do?
And what brings you up to this part of England, Holmes? Are you hot on the trail of some desperate criminal?
Dear me, no. Dr. Watson and I are taking a little holiday, and you and your wife?
We live here in the manor house.
Well, you're very lucky. It's a beautiful part of the country, Mrs. Treadgold.
I hate it. I was born and brought up in London. I'm never really happy outside the city.
Yes, Oliver's not one for the peace of the countryside, I'm afraid. Well, perhaps we'll get back there. It's a little difficult these days, you know. We've got the boy to consider.
Boy? Your son, sir?
My dead brother's son, Doctor.
We have no children.
My little nephew's only 4 years old, you see, and I'm his guardian as well as being executor of his estates up here. So you can understand it would be difficult for us to get back to London.
It's only difficult because you put the child's happiness before mine, Arthur.
Oh, now, Olive, you know I have to watch his interests up here. After all, when he comes of age, he'll be one of the richest young men in Norfolk.
Yes, and with money that should have come to us. In any case, Arthur, if we do have to live up here, I'd find it more tolerable if you'd keep this gypsy scum off the estates.
You seem to have taken a violent dislike to the gypsies, Mrs. Treadgold. May I ask why?
Oh, they persecute us. They steal our sheep, they break our windows, and just the other day they wantonly led our prize pig into the Bragstone quagmire and let the beast perish.
Why should they single you out for persecution like this, do you suppose?
Well, I can't imagine. I've always tried to be nice to them.
Too nice, Arthur. That's your trouble.
Well, I have a very good reason for humoring them, my dear. You see, Holmes, I've always been afraid they may carry this feud so far that they'll even hurt the baby. Olive, my dear, I wonder if you'd go ahead and wait for me in the carriage. It's getting rather chilly. I'll join you in a moment.
Very well, Arthur, but don't keep me waiting long. Good evening.
Good evening.
Good night, Mr. Treadgold.
Let's stroll away from the camp, shall we? I've got something very important to tell you. Something I didn't like to say in front of Olive. The gypsies have threatened to kidnap our boy.
Great Scott, how shocking.
What form did their threat take, sir?
This letter. I found it pinned on the frame of my dressing room mirror when I went up after dinner tonight.
Let me see it, will you, please?
Well, what does it say, Holmes?
A Romany Rye... A Romany Rye? Won't take your insults forever, Major and Mrs. High and Mighty. Watch out for the Treadgold heir. The Bragstone quagmire would make a nice finishing school for him.
Romany Rye? What's that mean?
Well, it's their own term meaning gypsy. Mr. Holmes, What shall I do?
Major Treadgold, I should say...
Great heavens! That shot just missed me.
Where the blazes come from? I can't see a soul.
Easily have come from behind any one of those caravans ahead of us.
If you wanted direct evidence, gentlemen, this is it. That is the first open attempt on my life. Holmes, what extraordinary luck for me that you're in the neighborhood. I'll pay you any fee you name to handle this business.
It seems to me that this is a job for the police.
I don't want to go to them.
Oh, why not, sir?
Well, I'm afraid that these attacks may stem from some injustice to the gypsies committed by my late brother. If that were so, I wouldn't wish to expose the fact. I want this kept private. What do you say, Mr. Holmes?
Very well, sir. I'll accept the case. It shall be kept private, and I promise to do everything in my power to protect the safety of the Treadgold heir. We are staying at the Rose and Crown in the village. Please get in touch with me if there should be any further developments.
The affair seems to be closed down for the night now, Holmes. They're turning out the naphtha flares.
Yes, let's stroll over to Jasper Hearn's caravan, shall we? He should be free now.
Well, if he's head of this tribe, he ought to be able to tell you something about this Treadgold business.
Yes. Though I shall first ask him about his son, Pyramus, the man I'm looking for. I think the fact that I know his son will inspire confidence. Here we are. This is the caravan.
That girl, Lydia Petrulengo, sitting outside, the one that was telling fortune.
Yes. Good evening.
Who are you? And what do you want?
I wish to speak to Jasper Hearn.
He is not here. He's gone to the marshes.
When will he be back?
I do not know. You bring trouble to Jasper?
No, my dear. This is a personal visit.
We're not after him for being a thimble engro. Or for penning duckerin.
Oh, for a Gorgio, you speak our Romany well, brother. Oh, you are a true Lavengro, master of words. Where did you learn it?
From Jasper's son, Pyramus.
Oh, you know Pyramus then.
A fine boy.
Oh, sit down on the grass, my friend. You may wait here for Jasper. He will be back soon.
Thank you.
Is that your violin lying on the steps, young lady?
No, that is Jasper's bosham.
Jasper's bosham? What on earth's that?
That is the Romany word for violin. You play, sir?
No, but my friend does.
So? Oh, then take it, brother. The stars are bright. The night is warm. Music will be sweet.
To a Romany chai, I'm afraid my violin playing will sound rather poor stuff.
Play on, brother. Stop, brother. You play well, but Sarasate Zigeunerweisen is not the true gypsy music. I've heard it in London and in Budapest. They call it gypsy. But what can a Gorgio know of the true heart of Romany? Wait here. I will get my own violin.
Charming girl, charming. But why does she keep on talking about Gorgios? Is that more of their confounded gibberish?
Gorgio, old chap, is the term they use for anyone who is not a true gypsy.
Now I will play for you the real gypsy airs.
Thank you. I should appreciate it very much. But before you begin, I wonder if I might ask you a question.
A friend of Pyramus may ask me any question. What is it?
I observed you telling fortunes earlier on tonight. You refused to tell a certain gentleman's hand and gave the money back. Did you know who the gentleman was?
No, brother. Nor the noisy woman with him. I refused to pen the duckerin because I saw blood and violent death in his hand. Violent death it is soon to come.
Violent death? Good Lord.
Watson, old fellow, I want you to do me a favor.
Yes, of course I will. What is it?
I must remain here until Jasper Hearn comes back. I should like you to return to the inn. It's more than possible that we may have news from our client before the night is out. I'll be back later.
Oh, well, it's nice of you to give me the best job. Good night, Miss Petrulengo.
Good night.
And now, please play for me a true Romany air.
Very well, my friend. Listen. Now you must play, brother. I shall make a true Boshemengro of you. Come, see if you can follow me.
monsieur, you have taught him well. You have made a true bushmaker of him.
He is an apt pupil, Jasper.
Well, with such a teacher, it's hard to be otherwise, Mr. Hearn. That is, if one has a spark of music in one's soul.
Call me Jasper, brother. You have spoken well, my son. You have talked wisely to me of things that I have not understood. Come, we shall drink wine together underneath the stars. I shall get glasses and a flagon.
Jasper has taken a great fancy to you, brother.
And I to him. He's a fine man.
Sherlock Holmes.
Yes, Lydia?
May I read your hand, brother?
Why, yes, of course.
A strange hand. And a beautiful one. A long lifeline, and yet I see sudden death and violence surrounding you. Now, at this moment. And in the future, I see a journey for you across the seas within a year. Beware of water that runs in the mountains. Near death will befall you there. More travels, more dangers. Oh, you must be careful, brother. Oh.
What is it?
Our paths are destined to cross but once. We shall not meet after this night. That makes me sad.
Oh, but we shall meet again. I shall be here for some days yet.
No, it says in your hand that we shall not meet again. And a hand cannot lie. Who is this that comes toward us through the moonlight?
It's my friend, Dr. Watson, I think. Yes. Hello, Watson. What's wrong?
Wrong. Everything's wrong. Mrs. Treadgold's waiting in the carriage. She wants you to come at once.
Indeed? Why?
The child has been kidnapped. Major Treadgold's gone for the police, and Mrs. Treadgold is threatening to rouse the local inhabitants and come out here and burn this camp to the ground if you don't find the child.
You tell Mrs. Treadgold to return home. She can do no good here.
But Holmes...
Tell her, old chap, that I have the case well in hand.
But how can you have? You've been out here all the time, playing your violin.
Have faith in me, please, old fellow, will you? And deliver the message. Then come back here and join me, and I'll explain everything to you.
Very well. I suppose you know what you're up to.
Violence and trouble, brother. It is all there in your hand.
Well, what must be shall be, and I wouldn't have it otherwise. But for the moment, the sky is starlit, the air is still, and the melody you played haunts me. Let's play it together again, shall we?
I should like that. I should like that very much.
Dr. Watson will continue his story in just a few seconds, during which time I'd like to talk specifically to the ladies, if I may, and tell you about Petri California Muscatel. Just as Petri California Port has long been known as the wine of gentlemen, Petri Muscatel has been known as the favorite of the ladies. That's because Petri Muscatel is a golden-colored wine that looks like captured sunshine and tastes as... Well, did you ever taste big, plump muscat grapes picked when they're still misty and dew-covered? If you have, you know what to expect when you taste Petri Muscatel. The flavor of Petri Muscatel comes right from the very heart of luscious, hand-picked muscat grapes. You couldn't ask for a more delicious wine than Muscatel. Petri Muscatel. Well, Dr. Watson, I must say this is a strange story you're telling us. You mean to say that the heir to the Treadgold estates had been kidnapped, and yet Sherlock Holmes paid no attention?
Yes, that's what it seemed like, Mr. Bartell. I couldn't understand him. I'd never known him to be so indifferent to a case. There he sat until the early hours of the morning as he and that girl scraped away at their violins and never said a word about the kidnapped baby. Finally, as we walked home across the field a few hours before dawn, his mind seemed to return to the matter at hand. He spoke quietly, and yet there was a note of suppressed excitement in his voice.
Watson, my dear fellow, you're angry with me, aren't you?
No, Holmes, I must say, but I'm a little confused. That girl seems to have bewitched you. Have you forgotten that you accepted the job of guarding the Treadgold heir, and that the child was kidnapped tonight?
No, I'm fully aware of the fact.
Holmes, for heaven's sake, stop being so infernally matter-of-fact. What's come over with you?
Oh, possibly it's the mood of this mild autumn night. It is indeed a St. Martin's summer. So much so that I've left my coat and deerstalker cap behind me at the encampment. Let's go back, shall we? And incidentally, when we get there, I can set your mind at rest by showing you the kidnapped child.
You mean you know where it is?
Certainly. It's, in the camp.
Then the gypsies did steal it.
No, my dear fellow. I did.
What? This is one of those occasions when you absolutely infuriate me, Holmes. If you must keep me up half the night while you have a fitting conflict with a gypsy girl, least of all you can do is tell me what's going on. You say you stole the child yourself. In heaven's name, why?
Because the threatening note to Major Treadgold was so obviously a fraud.
Oh, why do you say that?
You will remember that the letter began, "A Romany Rye will not take your insults forever." Now, a Romany Rye, despite what Major Treadgold said, does not mean a gypsy, but a man who knows about gypsy law. It is a term no true gypsy would apply to himself. He would use the expression Romany child. So it was obvious from the beginning that no gypsy threatened the child. Now, who else had a motive for harming it?
Well, Major Treadgold, because he stood to inherit the estate.
Yes, or his wife. It's quite obvious she has no liking for our present life, and the child is an obstacle to a new one. With the child kidnapped and later made away with, obviously they both stood to gain a great many of the things they wanted.
Yes, Joe, you're right. And whoever the culprit is took the precaution of pinning the blame in advance on the unfortunate gypsies by writing the false kidnapping note. Wait a minute, but how about the shot that was fired at us tonight as we walked with Major Treadgold?
Probably fired by an accomplice to the plot, in order to give authenticity to the supposed danger.
And the child is now in the gypsy encampment.
Yes, I promised that I would protect the Treadgold heir, and so I arranged with Jasper Hearn to have the boy kidnapped for his own safety.
But if anyone should find the child, they'll say the gypsies deliberately stole him.
Oh, I'm quite certain that before that occasion arises, old chap, the criminal will have shown his or her hand. Come on, old fellow. Put your best foot forward. It's a long way back to the camp yet, and it's nearly dawn.
Have come back, brother? You wish to spend the remainder of the night in the encampment?
No, thank you, Jasper. I just came back for my cap and coat. It was so warm tonight, and I forgot about them, and I started to walk home without them.
I will find them for you. Oh, we found this message for you soon after you had left. It was pinned to the door of the caravan. I do not know how it got there. I will search for your coat and cap.
Another message? What does it say, Holmes?
Never trust a Romany Rye. Uh-huh. The same mistake again, Watson. Your plans have been betrayed. For proof, meet me at the Bragstone quagmire at dawn.
It's a trap, Holmes.
Obviously. We must spring it with caution.
I cannot find your coat or your cap, brother. It has vanished.
Vanished? May I speak to Lydia?
That is a strange thing, too. Lydia has gone also.
She's gone. Tell me, Jasper, did she read this note?
Yes, she did. She could not help reading it.
Then she, too, realized it was a trap. She went out in my coat and deer-stalking hat to keep the appointment for me.
Holmes, we must go after her.
Jasper, call out the Romany Childs. There's a devil waiting to be caught in the Bragstone quagmire.
How much further to the quagmire, Jasper?
200 yards. No more.
There's Lydia. There she is. And she's dressed in my deer-stalking hat and coat, walking into the trap that was set for me. Lydia! Lydia!
They got her. Look. She's stumbled. She's fallen.
I'll go to her, Watson. Jasper, get that devil who staged this fiendish plot. I've a score to settle with him.
Do not worry, brother. The score will be settled. Follow me, Doctor.
Right, Joe. I'm right behind you.
Lydia.
Sherlock Holmes, I was wrong. We do meet again. Your hand lied to me.
Oh, Lydia. You're wounded. What can I do for you?
There is nothing you can do, brother. No one can help me now. There is little pain. There is little time. Please, hold my hand.
There. Tell me, Lydia, did you see who fired the shot?
Yes. It was the man whose fortune I told today. The man with the noisy wife.
Major Treadgold.
Jasper and the men will take care of him. There is one thing I wish to tell you, brother.
Yes?
Our short meeting has brought me happiness. I should like to think I can leave you something so that you will not forget me.
I shall always remember you, Lydia. Always. You gave your life for mine.
There is one thing of mine that I wish you to have. It will remind you of me.
What is it?
My violin. It brought us together. I should like you to have it, brother.
Lydia.
Do not be sad. It is good. My life for yours. You will give help to many people. It is in your hand. Goodbye. Oshimengro.
Holmes, it was dreadful. Dreadful. The gypsies surrounded Major Treadgold. They forced him back into the Braxton quagmire. I tried to pull him out, but I couldn't do it single-handed.
I'm not sorry, Watson. Jasper, you know that Lydia is dead?
Yes, I know it. The gypsies knew it, too. That is why you were single-handed, Doctor, in your attempts to save the murderer. No Romany child would raise a finger to help him.
Yes, I can understand that, but great Scott, man, if you'd seen his face as the quaking mud sucked him under.
Lydia's death was less dramatic, but equally moving, I assure you.
Sherlock Holmes, I met you less than 5 hours ago. You have saved my tribe from a devilish plot that would have blackened their names. A plot that would have driven them from the countryside. What can I do in return?
2 things. First, tell me where I may reach your son, Pyramus.
His address is in this sealed envelope, brother.
Thank you.
What else may I do for you?
As Lydia died, she willed me one gift for remembrance.
And what was that gift, brother?
A violin.
Of course. Here. Here it is.
Huh. She told me I might become a true Boshemengro. Let's see if I can recapture the melody once more.
That was a very strange story. A very fascinating one. Tell me, do you really believe that gypsies can tell your fortune by reading the palm of your hand?
Oh, frankly, I don't know, Mr. Bartell. Perhaps they can. Perhaps it's coincidence. And then again, maybe some gypsy women have a heightened sense of intuition. You know, a woman's intuition can be an extraordinary thing.
Yeah, so my wife keeps telling me. Of course, I have a kind of intuition myself.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm. Every time I see a bottle of wine with the name Petri on the label, my intuition tells me I'm going to like it. And I always do, too.
Mr. Bartell, if ever I saw a man with a one-track mind, you're that man.
Thank you, Doctor. As long as my one track is Petri, I can't miss. Because nobody can miss with Petri wine. What other wine has such tradition, such a story behind it? Petri wine is made by a family, the Petri family. They've owned and operated their own business ever since its inception, back in the 1800s. The Petri family has been making good wine for generations, and they've been handing on down in the family, from father to son, the fine art of turning luscious, sun-ripened grapes into fragrant, delicious wine. And that sure adds up to a lot of experience. You can just bet your last dollar that no matter what kind of wine you want, when you ask for a Petri wine, you're asking for good wine, because Petri took time to bring you good wine. Well, Dr. Watson, what story are you planning to tell us next week?
Next week, Mr. Bartell, I'm going to tell you of a strange adventure that Sherlock Holmes and I had in the East End of London. It concerns 5 nephews, an eccentric will, and a dead man's watch that gave us the clue to murder.
Tonight's Sherlock Holmes adventure was written by Dennis Green and Anthony Boucher and was suggested by an incident in the Sir Arthur Conan Doyle story, The Adventure of the Red Circle. Music is by Dean Fostler. Mr. Rathbone appears through the courtesy of Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, and Mr. Bruce through the courtesy of Universal Pictures. They are now starring in the Sherlock Holmes series. The Petri Wine Company of San Francisco, California, invite you to tune in again next week, same time, same station. Sherlock Holmes comes to you from our Hollywood studio. This is Harry Bartell saying goodnight for the Petri family.
Petri Wine brings you Basil Rathbone and Nigel Bruce in the new adventures of Sherlock Holmes. The Petri family, the family that took time to bring you good wine, invite you to spend the next half hour listening to Dr. Watson tell us another exciting adventure he shared with his old friend, that master detective, Sherlock Holmes. And I'd like to tell you about something you ought to share with your family before dinner. And that's Petri California Sherry. Because Petri Sherry can make that time before dinner a high spot in your day. That Petri Sherry is a truly fine wine. Its color is a deep amber, rich and inviting. And the wine is wonderfully smooth and full-bodied. Flavor, a swell. Honestly, I mean it when I say the best beginning a good meal ever had is a glass of Petri Sherry. Oh, and look, if some of your family like their sherry dry, not sweet, they'll really like Petri Pale Dry Sherry. So to be sure you please everyone, don't buy one, buy two. Buy the regular Petri Sherry and Petri Pale Dry Sherry. And be sure you look for those letters P-E-T-R-I, because they spell the proudest name in the history of American wines, Petri. And now I know our good friend Dr. Watson's expecting us. Let's go in and join him.
Come in.
Good evening, Doctor.
Good evening, Mr. Bartell.
Say, how are you feeling, Doctor? All over that attack of flu you had?
I'm feeling very much better, thank you, my boy. I'm still a little weak. We old fossils take much longer to get over that sort of thing than you young fellows.
Well, you take good care of yourself, Doctor. You've got a lot of friends, you know.
Oh, I'm very glad to hear that. Thank you, Mr. Bartell. And now settle yourself down, and I'll get on with tonight's new Sherlock Holmes adventure.
Where did it take place?
You may not be familiar with the names of Jersey, Guernsey, Alderney, and Sark, but those are the four principal islands that make up the group known as the Channel Islands.
Oh, yes, Doctor, I have heard of them. Somewhere in the English Channel, aren't they? Between the southern coast of England and the northern coast of France?
That's quite right, my boy, though I very much doubt if you ever heard of the tiny island on which this story happened. It was the island of Garth, a minute but self-contained spot with a population of just under 1,000 inhabitants, subsisting, and from what I saw of the island in those days, subsisting very well on its dairy products.
Was it under the rule of the British government, Doctor?
No, Mr. Bartell, not exactly. You see, the island belonged to a family by the name of Horn. The head of the family, who was known as the Seigneur of Garth, was an independent ruler owing nominal allegiance to the King of England. That allegiance was expressed by one of those traditional ceremonies in which the Seigneur annually presented 1 pound of freshly churned butter to a representative of the British Crown.
Times haven't changed much, have they, Doctor? A pound of butter is still worth a king's ransom. But tell me, what were you and the great Sherlock Holmes doing on the island of Garth?
Well, I just coming to that, my boy, if you'll give me a minute. It was in the summer of 1896 when, to my utter amazement, Holmes informed me that we were going to the island of Garth as the official representatives of the British Crown to accept the annual presentation of butter. At the time, I must confess, I couldn't see why Holmes wanted to accept such a ridiculous mission. It was only as we approached the island in a small fishing boat that he told me a great deal more was at stake than a pound of butter. Unfortunately, Mr. Bartell, I'm not much of a sailor, and as the wind was blowing hard and the sea racing, I'm afraid I wasn't a very intelligent companion.
Watson. We'll soon be there.
I hope so. I feel wretched, Holmes. I must say the whole trip seems utterly ridiculous to me. Plunging and bobbing about in a little boat in a raging torrent just because somebody wants to give somebody else a pound of butter.
Dear old Watson, you don't really think our mission is so innocuous, do you?
Then why are we going to the island of Garth?
We're going to the island of Garth at the express wish of its present ruler, Martha Horn.
Martha Horn? I never heard of her.
She's an extremely spirited old lady. And the only woman who dared tell a certain resident of Windsor Castle that she looked devilishly dowdy for an empress.
Great Scott, you mean that
Watson, that Martha Horn's behests are not lightly disregarded. Obviously, she wishes to see me urgently. Also, my brother Mycroft put pressure on me. He reminded me that a visit to Garth might be closely allied to this emerald tie pin I wear. Of course, you recall the origin of this pin?
Well, naturally. That lady at Windsor Castle gave it to you after our little trouble last year over those stolen plans for the Bruce Partington submarine.
Exactly, my dear fellow. But remember that the spy Oberstein had put those plans up for auction in all the naval centers of Europe. Some hint of their nature must have leaked out. It's even possible that other powers may be able by now to duplicate the pride of our submarine fleet. And whoever controls the channel, Watson, controls England.
Well, they're dropping anchor, and yet we're still a quarter of a mile out from the island. Why do you think they're doing that?
Here comes the skipper. He'll tell us.
Here is as close to the island as we may approach, monsieur. We have already sent signals. A smaller boat is putting out for you. It will be here in a little while.
Thank you.
A smaller boat. Good Lord. Holmes, you were hinting at the naval significance of the island of Garth.
Yes, old chap, I was.
Well, what good would it be as a port if even a small boat like this can only come within half a mile of it?
For a surface vessel, no. But we were speaking of submarines. Garth, I learned from the encyclopedia, boasts a magnificent interior cavern accessible only through underwater channels.
Great Scott, an ideal natural harbor and dry dock for a submarine fleet.
Precisely. And on the control of the island of Garth, Watson, may well rest the fate of the British Isles. Now, old chap, perhaps you see why Mycroft was so anxious for us to collect a pound of butter.
Doesn't it seem wonderful to be on land again? First the fishing smack, and then that wretched little rowing boat. Then the bucket swinging us up the face of the cliff. Now at last I can stretch my legs.
Steady, old chap, steady. Let me give you a hand. You'll soon get your land legs back again.
Thank you. I'm a bit shaky, I must confess. Hello? Who's that couple walking towards us?
Our welcoming committee, no doubt. How do you do?
Mr. Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson. Permit me to present myself. I am Dr. Hugo Oberwald.
How do you do, sir?
How do you do, Doctor?
And this is Mrs. Reeves, the housekeeper at Horn Castle, where you will be staying.
How do you do?
How do you do, Mrs. Reeves?
Welcome to the island of Garth, gentlemen.
We were deputed to come and greet you and take you back to the castle. We can walk there across the cliff tops. It isn't very far.
Splendid. I think my friend will appreciate traveling on terra firma once again.
Dear me, Herr Doctor. You are not a good sailor, perhaps?
No, perhaps about it, sir. I had a miserable crossing.
I am sorry to hear it. I trust your short stay at the castle will be some recompense for the journey.
The formal presentation of the butter will take place tonight. There will be no reason why you gentlemen cannot return to the mainland tomorrow.
Oh, thank you, Mrs. Reeves, but it's more than likely that we shall stay on for a few days.
Oh, it will be quite unnecessary.
I'm afraid that is a matter for Mrs. Horn and ourselves to decide.
I'm afraid that Mrs. Horn is incapable of making any further decisions.
Oh, what do you mean, madam?
Obviously, you have not heard, but the news is slow in reaching the mainland. Mrs. Horn died yesterday.
Died?
Good Lord. A natural death, I suppose.
But, of course...
I attended her myself. Simple case of heart failure.
The poor lady died in her sleep.
Shall we begin our walk to the castle?
By Jove, Holmes, this changes things. You suppose it was a natural death?
I suppose nothing, old fellow. But in almost 20 years of practice, I can recall precisely 3 clients, actual or potential, who died natural deaths. Come on, let's follow them.
Mr. Sherlock Holmes, Dr. Watson, this is Mr. Christopher Horn, grandson of Mrs. Horn and the new ruler of Garth.
How do you do?
Hello.
How do you do, sir?
Very nice of you fellows to come over here. Too bad you had to arrive just as the poor old gal kicked the bucket, though.
Allow me to offer my condolences on your grandmother's death, sir.
Yes, indeed, Mr. Horn.
Thank you. It was a ghastly business. I found her,
Christopher.
Frightful sight. There was an awful silly grin on the old dear's face, and...
Don't you think it would be more to the point if you were to explain the ceremony in connection with tonight's presentation?
Oh, you're right, Reevy. Reevy's a terrible tyrant, but she is efficient. Don't know what I'd do without her. Always ran everything for poor old Granny. Why, when the old girl was ill, she...
Christopher, I gave you a schedule of the ceremonies this morning. What did you do with it?
Dash it, Reevy, I don't know. Must have lost it.
And I have my own copy in the study.
I swear I don't know what I'd do without you.
Excuse us a moment, gentlemen.
I'll be back in a jiffy.
Holmes, what in thunder's going on here? That boy's completely under the thumb of Mrs. Reeves. He was trying to tell us something, but that frightful woman kept changing the subject.
He spoke of an awful, silly grin on the dead woman's face. Didn't that suggest something to you?
By Jove, that's one of the characteristic symptoms of strychnine poisoning.
Exactly, old fellow. And perhaps he was going on to mention the equally characteristic arching of the body. We've got to get Mr. Horn to ourselves for a little while, and you've got to examine the body of the dead woman. And it's going to be difficult. Is that a balcony outside the window? Yes, it is. Come along. Let's see what it leads to.
The balcony seems to lead right round this particular wing of the castle. Must have served as a lookout in the olden days. I wish the balcony were a little wider. It must be a sheer drop of a couple of 100 feet down to the rocks below.
Yeah. Hello. These must be the windows of the room adjoining the one we just came out of. Let's go a little closer, shall we? We may be able to find out something.
Can you see anything?
Yes. They're in there. Mrs. Reeves and the boy. She's leaving the room. Now's our opportunity. I'll tap on the window.
He sees us. He's coming to open it.
What are you two doing out there? Admiring the view?
Yes, my boy. It's quite beautiful.
Mr. Horn.
Yes, Mr. Holmes.
I was a great admirer of your grandmother. I was interested in what you were telling me of her death. She had a grin on her face, you said.
Yes, it was awful. Her body was all hunched up like a croquet hoop.
Really?
Of course, Dr. Oberwald said it was perfectly all right, but I must say it seemed dashed odd to me.
Yes, it was far from all right, I assure you.
And you started to say something else. What was it? Let me see. You said, when she was ill...
Oh, yes, that was a silly business. When she was ill, she thought she was in danger from poisoning, so she made Mrs. Reeves taste all her food and drink.
Did she really? Where is your grandmother's body now?
In the West Wing. The funeral's to be tomorrow morning.
I see. Where did Mrs. Reeves go?
I'm here on the balcony behind you, gentlemen, listening to your conversation with the greatest interest. Christopher, let me warn you. These men are the emissaries of the British government. They would stop at nothing to take the island over. These men are trying to influence you against me, against Reevy, who has looked after you ever since you were born, and who tries to protect you now that your grandmother has gone and you are alone.
Yes, I know, Reevy, but after all...
That is your pride as the head of the Horn family, the Seigneur of Garth. The Garth that I'm trying to save for you. This man is completely unscrupulous. He was about to accuse me of murder. Weren't you, Mr. Sherlock Holmes?
The thought had occurred to me, Mrs. Reeves.
Of course it had, because you wished to poison Christopher's mind against me. Well, Mr. Holmes, we have no police on the island of Garth. Our only law is the word of the Seigneur, and Christopher now holds that title. Seigneur, what do you say? Will you allow an Englishman to blind you by accusing me of being a murderess?
Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, I shall meet you at the ceremony tonight. Beyond that, I don't care to speak to you again. Good day.
A shame to spoil your plans, isn't it, Mr. Holmes?
Well, upon my soul.
Magnificent, Watson. Magnificent. A murderess who seeks to defeat me by accusing herself. Superb. It's a new game, my dear fellow, and one that must be played to a finish.
We'll hear the rest of Dr. Watson's story in just a second, so I'm just going to remind you that right now is one time you'd really enjoy a glass of Petri California Port. You couldn't ask for a more delicious wine. Petri Port, with its deep, rich red color and its heart of the grape flavor, is one of America's all-time favorite wines. Petri Port is wonderful after dinner and perfect to serve when company comes. Try it. But just remember that when you want the kind of port I'm talking about, you've got to make sure it's Petri Port, because all Petri wines are good wines. Dr. Watson, this is certainly an unusual story you're telling us tonight. What happened after Mrs. Reeves left you and Sherlock Holmes standing on the balcony?
We retired to our rooms and had a quiet and lonely lunch. Though the great man said little, I could see that he was deeply excited and that his keen brain was evolving some plan that would enable us to solve the mystery of Mrs. Horne's death. After lunch, we started to descend the stairs leading to the main hall of Garth Castle. As we did so, Holmes said...
Watson, we're in no danger ourselves. Mrs. Reeves knows that we're here as emissaries of the British government.
Yes, and if we didn't return with the butter within a few days, there'd be a British dreadnought here looking for us.
However, I am in danger of one of my worst defeats. My professional pride is piqued. If only I could... Watson.
Yes, Holmes?
If at any time today I slip you a note, don't read it at once, but... Here comes Mrs. Reeves. Precisely, Watson. I entirely agree. If I do not make the test on Mrs. Horne's body within 24 hours of her death, it will be useless. I must make it by 3 o'clock this afternoon.
Mr. Holmes.
Oh, yes, Mrs. Reeves.
I want to apologize for my behavior before lunch. I was intolerably rude.
Oh, please, no.
Whatever my quarrels may be with British politics, I at least owe to both of you the duties of hospitality.
That's very gracious of you, Mrs. Reeves. I wonder, would your hospitality also include a personally conducted tour of the subterranean caverns for which this island has become internationally famous?
Would they really interest you?
Well, I'm afraid that my friend and I won't have the time.
Oh, yes, not at all, Watson, not at all. We have plenty of time, as long as we're back here by 3 o'clock.
I'm sure Dr. Oberwald would be delighted to join us. He has made quite a study of the unique rock formation.
Oh, that's splendid. It should prove a most interesting excursion.
But, Holmes, why do we want to go stomping around a lot of damp and smelly caves?
Well, the exercise will do us good, old fellow. Will you lead the way, Mrs. Reeves? And please remember that it's most important that I return here...
I remember, Mr. Holmes. You must be back here by 3 o'clock. A little further, Mr. Holmes, and we shall reach the giant cavern.
Most interesting. Watson and Dr. Oberwald seem to have lagged behind us somewhat.
They will be here in a moment. There. This is the giant cavern.
Magnificent. Truly a miracle of nature. It's a natural submarine dry dock hewn out of the rocks.
Yes, Mr. Holmes. And in the olden days, only the smugglers who inhabited this island knew the entrance that leads to this cave. The first seigneur of Garth found a cache of untold wealth hidden here.
Really?
Silks, jewels. There are still the remains of some of the finest Calvados brandy stored among these rocks.
Indeed. An incomparable drink.
Would you care for some? It is our custom whenever visitors honor us with their presence to offer them a glass.
I should be delighted.
There is a natural shelf here in the rocks. Perfect hiding place. Here you are, Mr. Holmes. And here is a glass.
This is a rare privilege. I imagine that very few people have been offered it.
Only our most distinguished visitors, I assure you.
This cavern is completely inaccessible from the outer sea, I presume.
Completely. Unless, of course, ships could swim under the sea.
Which, as you know as well as I, they can, Mrs. Reeves. Even outside the imaginings of Jules Verne.
Indeed. Would you care to explore a little deeper? The others will be with us soon.
Dr. Overveld, the others seem to be some way ahead of us.
Yes, they do, don't they, Doctor?
Holmes? Holmes, where are you?
Dear me, I'm afraid we cannot follow them.
Huh? What do you mean?
The next cavern is already cut off by the rising tide.
Great Scott, you mean that they're cut off?
I am afraid so. But do not worry here, Doctor. In a few hours, the tide will recede. They are in no danger. Just, shall I say, temporarily marooned.
Understand it. I'm getting confoundedly sleepy.
I'm so sorry. I'm afraid that we stayed here longer than I intended. I fear that we are cut off by the tides.
Cut off? By the tides?
We're in no danger. In a few hours, we should be able to return. But I'm afraid I cannot get you back at 3 o'clock, which was the time I promised.
But it's vital. Absolutely vital that I can get back. I'm so sleepy. But please keep talking. I must keep awake.
Dr. Overveld, I must get to Sherlock Holmes at once.
I am sorry here, Doctor. But we are not able to control the forces of nature. We cannot force the water to recede. Your friend is in no danger.
No, but he's got a most important test that he must make by 3 o'clock.
I am afraid that will be impossible.
I've got to do something. I should have come to these blasted caves in the first place. I don't know what on earth I ought to do. By Jove, that note that Holmes gave me, he told me to open it if... where did I put it? Ah, here it is.
A note from Mr. Sherlock Holmes, eh?
Vital that you make medical test. Great Scott, Dr. Overall, it's absolutely necessary for me to return to the castle at once.
Indeed. A note from Mr. Sherlock Holmes, and now it is most important that you return to the castle. No, my fine English friend. I am afraid I cannot allow you to.
Oh, I don't know how you propose to stop me, sir.
You see this revolver?
And do you see this stick?
I warn you, Herr Doctor.
Oh, no, you don't. I'm sorry you can't hear me, Dr. Overveld, but when Sherlock Holmes gives me orders, I carry them out.
Mrs. Reeves, are we still trapped by the tide? What time is it?
5 o'clock. I'm afraid that you'll be a trifle late for your important appointment. What a pity.
You deliberately trapped me here. You drugged the brandy and kept me a prisoner.
Did I? Now, why should I do that, Mr. Holmes?
Because you're greedy of power. That's obvious in your domination of that pleasant though weak young man who is now Seigneur of Garth. I'm sure your beliefs would find support in certain ideologies now arising in Germany. Your choice of a German doctor as an accomplice in your plans would support that theory.
And what might my plans be?
I should say that you're determined to give Garth as a submarine base to Germany. With this island in their power, they could control the channel.
Very interesting. And I suppose, as well as being a spy, I'm responsible for Mrs. Horn's murder?
You and Dr. Overveld between you. She was too strong for you. You had to get her out of the way. You probably made subtle attempts on her life at first, the origin of which you did not realize, but which caused her eventually to send for me. My arrival forced your hand, and so you and Dr. Overveld resorted to the quite unsubtle expedient of poisoning her.
All pure supposition, Mr. Holmes. The only law on this island is Christopher Horn. Do you suppose he'll believe you?
No, I suppose he won't. You've outwitted me, Mrs. Reeves. I walked into your trap just as you intended me to.
Then in that case, you may collect your pound of butter tonight and return to the mainland tomorrow.
Mrs. Reeves, how much longer do we have to wait for the tide before we can make our way back to the castle?
We can leave now. We could have left at any time. There's another secret entrance that is above the tide level. I merely had to make you overstay the hour of your test. I could not risk Christopher's seeing definite proof. Come now. I shall lead you back. You fool.
Holmes, where have you been all this time?
Mind that, Watson. Did you open the note?
Yes.
And followed my instructions?
Yes, it was, as you suspected.
Thank heaven, old chap. Then now we can hoist her with our own petard. Here she comes.
I'm glad to see, gentlemen, that you have assembled here in the seigneur's room. The ceremony of presenting the butter traditionally takes place here. As soon as Christopher arrives, we will explain our customs in this matter. Dr. Watson, I trust that Herr Oberwald proved an interesting companion on your excursion this afternoon.
Yes, indeed, most interesting. We had a discussion of the relative merits of the walking stick versus the revolver. I think I was able to make my argument fairly convincing.
Where is Dr. Oberwald now?
I imagine he's lying down. He had all the symptoms of impending headache when I saw him last.
Why are you smiling, Mr. Holmes? What's been going on?
I'm afraid, Mrs. Reeves, that your plans have misfired rather badly. As soon as Mr. Horn arrives, I expect you will be under arrest for murder and high treason.
Christopher would never believe you.
Wouldn't I? Mrs. Reeves, you poisoned my grandmother.
Christopher, what lies have these men been telling you?
You're the one that's been telling me lies. I believed you when you said you'd been tasting the old lady's food. But when Dr. Watson showed me the results of his test this afternoon, it was as clear as daylight.
But the tests could prove nothing after 24 hours had passed. You said so yourself, Mr. Holmes.
A deliberate lie, Mrs. Reeves. I'm afraid that I invented that mythical 24-hour test. I knew that as soon as I mentioned it, you would attempt to prevent my carrying it out. So I was delighted when you fell into my trap. You thought that you were shanghaiing me, whereas in reality I was shanghaiing you. My job is to prove your guilt to the senor. With your dominant presence away from the household, it was easy for Dr. Watson to make his test.
You devil! You knew all the time.
Well, of course I did. But I had to deceive you. I'm glad my performance was sufficiently convincing. By the way, Mrs. Reeves, the drugged brandy was dreadfully clumsy.
You didn't drink it home?
Why, of course I didn't. But it was very unflattering to me that Mrs. Reeves thought I might.
Mrs. Reeves, you realize what this means, don't you? I'm going to ask these gentlemen to take you and Dr. Oberwald back to the mainland with them tomorrow.
And stand trial in a British court? Never! I was born on the island of Garth. I have lived here all my life, and I shall die!
What are you up to? Stop her! She's going out on the balcony.
One day, Garth will belong to Germany. One day, the whole world will belong to Germany. Goodbye, you meddling fool! Goodbye!
Great Scott, she's gone. It must be a couple of 100 feet to the rocks below.
What a dreadful thing. I still can't believe she was a murderess and a traitor. Now, it's shocking.
A shabby finish to a shabby business. Mr. Horn, I suggest that we make sure Dr. Oberwald does not escape justice, and that we then perform the ritual presentation of the butter.
Yes, Mr. Holmes. The island of Garth will still pay tribute to England, and I think it always will.
Doctor, that was some story. So Germany didn't get the island of Garth after all.
No, Mr. Bartell. In fact, in after years, the island proved to be an invaluable submarine base for England.
Say, what about the pound of butter? Did Holmes get it?
Oh, yes. But why are you so interested in the butter?
Are you kidding? In our house, butter is our second most favorite topic of conversation.
Your second most favorite? Well, what's your favorite topic of conversation?
Remember, you asked me. Petri wine.
Oh, as if I didn't know.
Doctor, that Petri wine is something to really talk about. You know, the Petri family has been making wine for generations. Why, the art of making fine wine is their heritage. Handed down from father to son, from father to son. Believe me, when it comes to turning luscious, sun-ripened California grapes into fragrant, delicious wine, the Petri family really knows how. And they're proud of their wine, too. That's why the name Petri on a bottle of wine really means something. It's the personal assurance of the Petri family that every drop of that wine is good wine. It ought to be, because Petri took time to bring you good wine.
Well, Dr. Watson, what new Sherlock Holmes adventure do you have lined up for us next week?
Next week, Mr. Bartell, I'm going to tell you a story that took place on the Sussex Downs many, many years ago. It concerns a young girl, a painter in watercolors, and a very wise old lady. I call it The Adventure of the Living Doll.
Tonight's Sherlock Holmes adventure was written by Dennis Green and Anthony Boucher and was suggested by an incident in the Sir Arthur Conan Doyle story, The Adventure of the Bruce Poddington Plans. Music is by Dean Fosler. Mr. Rathbone appears through the courtesy of Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, and Mr. Bruce through the courtesy of Universal Pictures, where they are now starring in the Sherlock Holmes series. The Petri Wine Company of San Francisco, California, invite you to tune in again next week, same time, same station. Sherlock Holmes comes to you from our Hollywood studios. This is Harry Bartell saying goodnight for the Petri family. Petri Wine brings you Basil Rathbone and Nigel Bruce in the new adventures of Sherlock Holmes. The Petri family, the family that took time to bring you good wine, invites you to listen to Dr. Watson tell us another exciting adventure he shared with his old friend, that master detective, Sherlock Holmes. Oh, and say, I'd like to tell you about something myself. I'd like to tell you about the wine that more Americans prefer than any other wine. That wine is port. And if you want to know why port is such a favorite, just pour yourself a glass of wonderful Petri California port. Look at that Petri port. Look at its glowing deep red color. And sample that aroma. It'll remind you of a walk through a dew-covered vineyard. And now taste that Petri port. Boy, you've got something. Petri Port is one of the most delicious wines ever poured from a bottle. Right then and there, Petri Port will become your favorite wine. I'm confident of that. And I'm sure you'll want to serve Petri Port to your friends, too, after dinner or any time they drop in for a visit. And remember, you can serve Petri Port proudly, because those letters, P-E-T-R-I, spell the proudest name in the history of American wines. Petri. Petri wine. And now I'm sure our good friend Dr. Watson's ready for us. Let's go in and join him.
Come in. Ah, there you are, Mr. Bartell.
Good evening. Excuse me, Dr. Watson. I didn't know that you had company.
Shut the door, my boy, and come in and join us. Let me introduce you, Mr. Bartell. This is my friend, Mrs. Campbell.
How do you do, Mrs. Campbell?
How do you do, Mr. Bartell?
Mrs. Campbell is a very old friend of mine from England, and when she called on me today, I persuaded her to stay and have dinner, and then join us in this little session of storytelling. You see, Mr. Bartell, she's really what you might call the star of the Sherlock Holmes adventure that I'm going to tell you tonight.
Oh, come now, Dr. Watson. I actually played a very small part of the story. In any case, I was much too young at the time to know what was really going on.
Say, this is a great idea, Doctor. One of the characters out of your fabulous past here in California in 1946 and helps tell her own story.
Oh, no, Mr. Bartell. I'm no storyteller. That's the doctor's department. I'll just listen.
No, my dear. I'll set the scene, but you must ring up the curtain, as it were. In any case, my memory isn't too clear on some of the early points in connection with the case. You will have to help me out.
Oh, but you're talking to millions of listeners on the radio. I'd be terrified to speak over the air.
We're on the air now, Mrs. Campbell.
Oh, we're not, are we? Oh, dear.
No. Don't worry, Cynthia. If they're kind enough to listen to me week after week, I'm sure they'll be delighted to hear you. And now, to get on with the story. The title, The Adventure of the Living Doll. The setting, the Sussex Downs, near the bee farm to which Sherlock Holmes retired. The period, 1910. And now, Cynthia, my dear, the curtain's going up, and the first scene belongs to you. Supposing you set it for us.
Well, I'll try. We were living on the Sussex Downs also, Mr. Bartell, at that time. My name was then Cynthia Browning. My father, Arthur Browning, had been dead for some years, but my mother kept up the estate with a manager, a Hugh Tanner. I was away at school most of the year, of course, but the happiest times of my childhood were spent during those long summer months in Sussex. I lived in a small world, knowing only a few people and loving all of them, or almost all. First of all, there was Mother herself. She was the most beautiful woman in the world, and the sweetest. I remember she gave me a puppy on my 12th birthday. His name was Dusty, and he was so sweet. I talked to Mother about him one day. I must have sounded terribly young.
Mommy, darling, I do love Dusty. Very, very much. He's a lovely puppy, and you gave him to me.
You love him, Cynthia. I know that. But I've been feeding him. That's your job, darling. It's good for grown-up people to have responsibility.
Oh, Mommy, I'll feed him. Of course I will. I'll feed him so full, he'll burst.
Then there was the estate manager, Hugh Tanner, such a pleasant man, and so willing to tell a 12-year-old all the things that a 12-year-old has to know or die.
But, Mr. Tanner, why did you have to shoot the horse? He'd only broken his leg.
Cynthia, horses aren't like human beings. Their legs won't mend. Now think of a horse that couldn't brisk and run and gallop across the downs. We're actually being kind to him. Honest we are, Cynthia.
And then there was Frank King, the painter who lived on the downs. He taught me to open my eyes and really see things.
No, Cynthia. That sunset isn't red. It's gold and rust. And the water, child, look at it. It's almost rose in this light. Rose flecked with cobwebs of eggshell blue. Cynthia, darling, a sunset's never just one color. Do try and remember that, won't you?
And then there was Mr. Pound from the city. I gathered that he was terribly rich and he wanted to marry Mother. But he certainly didn't understand little girls.
Cynthia, I'm going to give you half a crown for being a very good little girl. Now, tell me, what will you do with it?
I'll buy something for Mommy.
Oh, no, my dear. This is your own money. You put it in the savings account at the post office, and it'll make more money for you. Always remember, my dear, take care of the pennies, and the pounds will take care of themselves.
Then there was the wonderful wise woman who knew all the things that aren't in books.
Always remember, my bunny, that it's good luck to touch the hump of a hunchback. But the curse of Beelzebub himself will be upon ye if ye look at a sliver of silver moon through the glass.
And then the strangest and most wonderful of all was the lean, middle-aged man with a sharp face and the bee-net whom I met one day on the downs.
Good afternoon, young lady.
Good afternoon. I'm Cynthia Browning.
My name is Holmes. Sherlock Holmes.
Why are you carrying that net? You looking for butterflies?
Oh, no, Cynthia. I'm a bee farmer.
Bee farmer? Oh, that sounds funny. How do you farm bees?
Well, come over to my place one day and I'll show you. I say, that's a beautiful doll you're carrying.
It isn't a doll. It's my mascot. It was given to me by Frank King, the painter. He made it for me. He made it to look as much like me as possible. I call her me.
It's a remarkable likeness.
See the hair? That's clippings off my hair. And the nails? Those are clippings from my own nails. She's really me, and I love her.
Your own nails and hair, and the doll is an exact replica of you? I don't like that, Cynthia. Remember, my dear, my name, it's Sherlock Holmes, and I live at the bee farm, and if anything unusual happens, come to me at once.
Of course, Dr. Watson. I'll confess that first meeting with Sherlock Holmes rather frightened me.
You didn't understand why he was so worried about the doll, eh?
No, but I remembered what he said about coming to him if anything unusual happened.
And I'm sure that unusual something did happen.
Yes, Mr. Bartell, and within a very few days. But at this point, I think Dr. Watson should take over the story. It's where he and Mr. Holmes really entered into it.
Oh, very well. As I mentioned earlier, Mr. Bartell, I was staying with Holmes. Late in the afternoon, as I remember, that you ran over to the bee farm where I first met you, Cynthia. A few moments before you arrived, Holmes and I, each of us with a cup of tea in our hands, were seated on the veranda gazing out across the downs and discussing the mutability of human affairs.
It's strange, Watson, that after a lifetime devoted to the more flamboyant aspects of everyday life, that now, in what is the fast approaching twilight of my days, I find such peace and companionship in the exact and predictable behavior of bees. I wonder what Moriarty would have thought.
Oh, you talking as if you're an old dodder of 90. You say what you like, but I don't think that you'll ever really be happy in retirement. You miss the danger, the excitement of the case, the public acclaim.
What are you talking about? My work was never for the public. And what did the public, the great unobservant public, who could hardly tell a weaver by his tooth or a typesetter by his left thumb, care about the finer shades of analysis or deduction? In any case, Watson, I chose a happy time to sink into oblivion. In comparatively recent years, the criminal seems to have lost all his originality and enterprise. My own little practice, when I gave it up, seemed to be in danger of developing into an agency for recovering lost lead pencils or giving advice to young ladies from boarding schools.
Oh, talking of young ladies, who's this little girl running up your driveway?
Oh, great Scott, it's little Cynthia Browning.
Oh, and who's she?
Oh, a charming young neighbor of mine. Hello, Cynthia.
Hello, Mr. Holmes.
You've come to see how I farm bees, haven't you?
No, Mr. Holmes. You told me to come to you. Something unusual happened. It has. Something that's frightened me.
Well, now, sit down, my dear. This is my old friend, Dr. Watson.
Oh, how do you do, Cynthia?
How do you do?
Now, Cynthia, dear, what has frightened you?
It's my mascot. My me. Look, somebody stabbed her through the heart.
Great Scott, a doll that's an exact replica of her, with a penknife thrust into it. Good gracious me.
When did you find your mascot like this?
Just after tea. Mommy had some gentlemen calling on her. And afterwards I went up to my room and found poor me on the bed. I remembered what you told me about anything unusual. And so I came over here as fast as I could.
Yes, I'm glad that you did, Cynthia.
Did you tell your mother where you'd gone with her?
No, I didn't. She was still talking to the gentleman.
Well, she'll worry about you when she discovers your disappearance.
No, don't worry, Watson. I shall go over and talk to her at once. Cynthia, my dear.
Yes, Mr. Holmes?
Who were the gentlemen calling on your mother?
Well, there was Mr. Tanner.
Yes.
He's the man who looks after the estate for Mummy.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. King, the painter.
Mr. King is the man who made this doll, eh? Now, who else was there?
Mr. Pound. He's a businessman from London that's staying with Mummy.
And they were all present in your house when you found the mascot lying on the bed.
Yes, Mr. Holmes.
What's no, chap?
Yes, sir?
I'm going over to see Cynthia's mother at once. I want Cynthia to stay here with you. Guard her, old chap, as you would your life. Mrs. Browning, I know I must seem like an intrusive neighbor, but possibly you've heard of me. My name is Holmes, Sherlock Holmes.
Well, who hasn't heard of the famous Sherlock Holmes? Please sit down, won't you?
Thank you. Your guests have left?
Yes. But how did you know I had guests? I know you're a great detective, but...
Your charming little daughter, Cynthia, came over to see me half an hour ago. She told me.
So that's where she went. Did she come back with you?
No, Mrs. Browning. I felt it safer that she remained at my place for a while. My friend, Dr. Watson, will look after her. I'm afraid she may be in danger.
In danger? Mr. Holmes, what makes you say that?
You know your daughter's doll, the one fashioned in her own likeness and with her own hair and nails?
Of course. Frank King made it for her.
While you were at tea this afternoon, your daughter found the doll lying on her bed with a penknife stuck through its heart.
That's very peculiar. But I don't see that she should be in any danger because of it, Mr. Holmes.
Mrs. Browning, certain practitioners of magic believe that if a doll-like effigy is made of a human being and the effigy is then mutilated, that a similar fate will befall the living original.
But, Mr. Holmes, that's black magic. You can't possibly believe in it.
Not in the results of stabbing a doll, Mrs. Browning, but well, it's possible that someone is trying to kill your daughter.
To kill Cynthia? Oh, no.
It may be more than a possibility, I'm afraid. And when these magical means fail, they will turn to more direct methods.
But who could possibly want her death?
You have not remarried, Mrs. Browning?
No, I feel it my duty to devote my life to Arthur's child, Cynthia.
Yes, then anyone wishing to marry you might feel that Cynthia stood in the way.
But that's absurd.
But logical, Mrs. Browning. Do you mind if I ask you a very personal question?
With Cynthia's safety at stake, you may ask any question.
Are any of the three men who were present at tea this afternoon desirous of marrying you?
Well,
Please be completely honest, Mrs. Browning.
At different times, they've all asked me to marry them, yes.
And you won't contemplate marriage because of your dead husband's child. Tell me, Mrs. Browning, have you seen this penknife before? It was the one found stuck through the doll's heart.
I don't think I've ever seen it before.
One final question. Would anyone among Cynthia's acquaintances have a knowledge of the practice of magic?
Well, the old woman that Cynthia calls the wise woman might.
Oh, who might she be?
A strange creature that lives in some hovel on the downs near here. She brews weird concoctions with herbs, love philters, and all that sort of thing.
I'd be a suitable companion for your daughter, Mrs. Browning.
I know it, Mr. Holmes. I've told Cynthia over and over again that she mustn't stray off and see the old woman. But you know how disobedient children are at her age. I'm sure she's been over there recently.
I'd like to talk to this woman. Where does she live?
I don't know exactly, but Frank can take you there. He used her as a model.
Frank King, the painter?
Yes, he lives in the village.
Then I shall call on him at once and persuade him to accompany me. We must find that wise woman and I hope save your child from magic. Magic and possible murder. Much further, Mr. King?
Only a few more yards, Mr. Holmes. A little cottage is just behind the trees there. It's a pretty broken-down place. Poor old girl has only a few pennies to her name, I imagine.
Mrs. Browning was telling me that you used this old woman as a model.
Yes, she was a fascinating subject. I painted her as she was mixing up some devil's concoction of herbs and spices. I had her standing over a smoking cauldron with the firelight playing on her. It was quite effective.
Yes, it must have been. The subject of witchcraft appeals to you, Mr. King?
Well, I don't know anything about it. It was just that she was such a wonderful subject for a painter. Here we are.
I'll knock on the door. I think we'll take the liberty of going in, shall we?
I don't know why not. Shh. What is it?
Listen. It came from that room. Someone is here. Come on.
Look at her. Look at her head. Poor devil.
Yes, she's still alive. She isn't long for this world. Can you hear me? Here, let me lift you up a little. Can you understand what I'm saying? Tell me, who was it that did this to you?
She's too far gone to speak.
Got a piece of paper and a pencil?
Yes. Wait a minute. Here you are.
Thanks. Now, can you write the name of the man who did this to you?
She's pushing the pencil away. I don't suppose she knows how to write. She's trying to show you something, Mr. Holmes. She's trying to crawl over to the wall.
Yes. Here, let me help you. This will be a hiding place of some kind.
Look. She's taking a brick out of the wall.
What is it? Great Scott! Money. A veritable jackdaw's nest of pennies. And small silver. And at least a dozen golden sovereigns. That must be the money.
Look! She's picking out one of the silver coins. She's trying to give it to you.
A sixpence, but what? Oh, poor woman, she's dead. And just as she was trying to tell me something.
I can't understand it. Golden sovereigns in this hovel, and she was showing you a silver sixpence as she died. Mr. Holmes, what are you going to do?
First, check on the young girl's safety. Meanwhile, I should like you to go back to my mother's. Assemble the other two men who were present at tea time this afternoon and keep them there until I arrive. I shan't be long.
But the police?
I shall summon them, Mr. King, when I have the murderer to offer them. And I'm convinced that will be before the sun sets tonight.
We'll hear the rest of Dr. Watson's story in just a second. Time enough for me to mention another wonderful Petri wine. Petri California Muscatel. If you like that subtle muscat flavor, who doesn't, you really like Petri Muscatel. Petri Muscatel is a clear golden wine. It is just as much a hit with the ladies as Petri Port is with the men. But I don't mean by that only the ladies like Petri Muscatel. In fact, if you want to be sure to please everybody, get both Petri Port and Petri Muscatel. In other words, don't buy one, buy two. But do be sure you always buy Petri. Now back to Dr. Watson and his guest tonight, Mrs. Campbell, who played a most important part in the story herself.
Oh, not nearly as important a part as that played by Mr. Holmes and Dr. Watson.
Well, Dr. Watson, what happened when Sherlock Holmes rejoined you at the bee farm?
Well, first of all, he made sure that the little girl was safe. Then he told me of finding the dead woman and of his theories as to the killing. I can almost hear him now, Mr. Bartell, as he said...
Watson. Someone wanted the little girl out of the way because they knew the mother would never marry while the child was alive.
And that someone persuaded the old woman to do the job for him, I suppose.
Undoubtedly. And she, believing in the powers of black magic, mutilated the doll, firmly convinced that in so doing she was destroying the young girl it was fashioned after.
And then, I suppose, when the potential murderer discovered the woman was merely indulging in stupid folklore, he killed her, realizing she was only a hindrance to him, and with her knowledge of the plan... a dangerous hindrance.
Exactly, my dear fellow. But how do you suppose we account for the hoard of money? Golden sovereigns, don't forget, that we found in the hovel.
Well, no doubt it was a sum that she was already being paid for the murder that she was going to commit.
As she died, she tried to give me the clue to her murderer by selecting certain coin. Now, in her possession, she had gold, silver, and copper. She chose a silver coin. And yet I can't see its significance, I must confess.
Well, at the moment, possibly not. And yet, before the evening's over, I bet you that...
What did you say, Watson?
I said before the evening's over, I bet you...
Thank you, old fellow. That's the clue. You bet me.
What on earth are you talking about, Holmes? I was just saying
You've just given me the answer to the whole problem, Watson.
What?
I'm much obliged to you. Stay here, will you, old chap? And look after Cynthia a little while longer. Within a very short time, I shall have her intended destroyer under lock and key.
Mr. Holmes, I'm glad you've come. I've had the greatest difficulty in persuading these three gentlemen that their presence was necessary.
Within a few minutes, Mrs. Browning, two of them will be entirely free to leave if they want to.
Mr. Holmes, I think it'd be a good idea to tell everyone what happened.
Yes, Mr.
Mr.
Pound,
Holmes,
I
I
don't
think it'd be a good idea to tell
Indeed.
everyone what happened.
Yes, how do you do, Mr. Pound?
How do you do, Mr. Holmes? Look here. If there's some scandal down here...
Oh, there is, Mr. Pound.
Then I want my name kept out of it. You hear? I have a seat on the London Stock Exchange.
Oh, very comfortable for you.
Yes.
And the other gentleman, by the process of elimination, must be Mr. Hugh Tanner, the manager of your estate, Mrs. Brown.
Yes, I'm Hugh Tanner. And now, Mr. Holmes, supposing you tell us what this is all about. I'm a straightforward man, and all this mystery is rather aggravating. Something has happened. Something that concerns us all. What is it?
Murder.
What? Murder? Good Lord, who's been murdered?
An old woman who lived in the village. Your daughter, Mrs. Browning, referred to her as the wise woman. Mr. King and I found her tonight in her cottage on the downs, beaten to death. Murdered.
Well, that's shocking, but what's it got to do with us?
I'll explain, Mr. Pound. Each one of you, I believe, would like to marry Mrs. Browning. Her daughter, Cynthia, is an obstacle to such a marriage. One of you decided to remove that obstacle and engaged the wise woman to carry out the plan. Finding the woman clumsy and ineffective, you decided that she was a dangerous witness, and so you murdered her. Fortunately, the poor woman, as she was dying, gave me the clue to her murderer.
But how did she do that, Mr. Holmes? I thought you said that she died without speaking.
She did, Mrs. Browning, but she gave me the clue nonetheless, though I was shockingly slow in spotting it.
Well, what was the clue?
Yes, let's stop being mysterious and come out into the open.
You were with me, Mr. King. As she died, I shall let you tell them.
Well, she was dying, unable to speak when Mr. Holmes asked who had attacked her. She couldn't write, but she showed him a hoard of copper and silver coins and a dozen golden sovereigns.
Sovereigns in a hovel like that? Oh, I see. She meant her murderer was the man who had paid her.
And with all that ill-gotten wealth, she died clutching a silver sixpence.
And you still don't see who the murderer is? Come along, gentlemen. You should know it as well as you know your own names. Now, Mr. King mentioned that there were a dozen sovereigns. Whose name does a sovereign suggest?
Sovereign? King. You, Frank King, were the murderer.
Oh, that's ridiculous. The old woman wasn't exactly a mouse Mastermind. Why should she be so indirect? And how much is a sovereign worth? £1. And your name, my friend, with a seat on the London Stock Exchange is Pound.
Oh, this is absolutely absurd. I can prove that I've never even met the woman.
Well, what is the answer, Mr. Holmes? I'm sure that you know it.
The answer is obvious, Mrs. Browning, though I'm ashamed to say that a chance remark of Dr. Watson's gave me the clue.
Oh, now look here. Stop beating about the bush, Holmes. What is the answer?
A very simple one, Mr. Pound. With 12 golden sovereigns at hand, sovereigns that would suggest either the name of King or Pound, what coin did the dying woman select?
A sixpence.
Exactly. A humble silver sixpence. And what is the common slang word for a sixpence?
A tanner.
Precisely. Which tells us that you, Mr. Hugh Tanner, killed the wise lady.
Try and prove it. That's all. Just try and prove it.
Holmes, what happened?
I found the murderer, old chap, thanks to you.
What do you mean, thanks to me?
Well, I was thinking of a sixpence, the coin the dead woman clutched in her hand, as a sixpence. When you said, I bet you, I thought of the much-used expression, bet your Tanner. That gave me the clue to the whole business. The dying woman was obviously trying to indicate that Hugh Tanner was her murderer.
He confessed, you say, before the police arrived.
Yes, after Frank King, the artist, had started to give him something of the thrashing he deserved. Oh, I take no particular pride in the case, Watson. Without your chance remark, I might easily have overlooked this obvious clue that the dying woman gave me. As I've said before, old chap, I should not attempt to emerge from my retirement. Yes. It's obvious that my reflexes are shockingly slow.
Rubbish. The police would never have solved it.
Oh, my dear Watson, when you compare me with the police, I realize that my retirement should be permanent. By the way, where is Cynthia?
Well, I arranged with your housekeeper for her to have an early supper. Some kippers, a poached egg or two, a piece of that treacle tart we had last night, and a pot of tea.
Oh, for a 12-year-old girl, my dear Watson, this is an occasion when I might accuse you of being a potential murderer.
Oh, come now, Holmes, you know perfectly well.
Here she comes now. Hello, Cynthia. Did you enjoy your supper?
It was lovely. Thank you, Mr. Holmes. Is everything all right? Can I go home now?
Yes, Cynthia. Everything's all right.
Tell me, my dear, did you ask Mr. King to make that mascot for you?
Yes, Mr. Holmes. The wise woman told me it would bring me luck.
Oh, yes, I thought so.
Mr. Holmes, will everything be just like before?
No, not quite, Cynthia. Mr. Tanner and the wise woman have gone away. You won't see them again.
Oh, dear.
But you have new friends here, haven't you?
Yes, and nice ones.
Remember that, Cynthia. We'll always be your friends.
I will, Dr. Watson. I like you both so much.
Ah, I'm glad. And tell me, Cynthia, do you like Mr. King, the artist?
Oh, yes. Almost as much as I used to like my daddy.
Uh-huh.
He's like my daddy, a little.
Oh, I'm glad to hear you say that, Cynthia. Tell your mother the same thing, will you? I think it might change a peculiarly foolish notion of hers.
Well, Dr. Watson and Mrs. Campbell, that was a really different kind of story. I'm sure glad you were here tonight, Mrs. Campbell. Tell me, has Dr. Watson changed much since you last saw him?
Well, yes. I think he's grown handsomer.
No.
And what about Mrs. Campbell, Doctor? Has she changed?
Well, she's more grown up than the last time I saw her, but she hasn't changed much in one respect.
What's that, Doctor?
Your appetite, my dear. Oh. I remember how Holmes was amazed at the amount you ate when you were a child, but you certainly had just as hearty a dinner this evening.
Well, that was your fault, Doctor. Your dinner was too good.
Oh, Cynthia, don't talk about the wine.
Well, why shouldn't I talk about the wine? It was wonderful.
Sure it was. It was Petri wine, that's why.
You see? Now you got him started.
And Mrs. Campbell, Petri wine is always good wine. That's because the Petri family has been making wine for generations. Ever since long ago when they started the Petri business, winemaking has been an art with the Petri family. It's a tradition, a heritage that they've handed on down from father to son, from father to son. Believe me, when it comes to turning luscious, sun-ripened California grapes into fragrant, delicious wine, well, you can bet your last dollar that the Petri family really knows how. No matter what type wine you prefer, for any occasion. You just can't miss with a Petri wine, because Petri took time to bring you good wine. Well, Dr. Watson, what new Sherlock Holmes adventure are you planning to tell us next week?
Well, as next week, as St. Patrick's Day is about 6 days away, Mr. Bartell, I thought next week that I'd tell you a rather unusual story that took place in Ireland at the turn of the century. It concerns the famous ceremony of kissing Blarney stone, St. Patrick's night revel, and an old Irish ballad that led directly to one of the most devilish murders that Sherlock Holmes and I ever encountered.
Tonight's Sherlock Holmes adventure was written by Dennis Green and Anthony Boucher and was suggested by an incident in the Sir Arthur Conan Doyle story, The Adventure of the Copper Beeches. Music is by Dean Fossler. Mr. Rathbone appears through the courtesy of Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, Mr. Bruce through the courtesy of Universal Pictures, where they are now starring in the Sherlock Holmes series. You can read about the stars of our broadcast in the April issue of Everybody's Digest. The Petri Wine Company of San Francisco, California, invites you to tune in again next week, same time, same station. Sherlock Holmes comes to you from our Hollywood studios. This is Harry Bartell saying goodnight for the Petri family. Petri Wine brings you Basil Rathbone and Nigel Bruce in the new adventures of Sherlock Holmes. The Petri family, the family that took time to bring you good wine, invite you to listen to Dr. Watson tell us another story about his old friend, that master detective, Sherlock Holmes. And incidentally, I'd like to tell you about a swell American custom. The custom of serving sherry wine just before dinner. Petri California sherry. You know, especially when you have guests, while you're waiting for that call to the dinner table, there's nothing better than a good glass of that good Petri sherry. You don't need fancy glasses for Petri sherry. No, sir. That wine tastes good out of any glass. And it looks good, too. Beautifully clear and the color of precious amber. Just try that Petri sherry and you'll feel like smacking your lips after every sip. Oh, and say, Petri makes two kinds of sherry. The regular sherry and Petri pale dry sherry. Just to make sure you get the perfect sherry for the whole family, don't buy one, buy two. But do be sure the sherry you buy is Petri sherry. Petri, the proudest name in the history of American wines. And now I'm sure our good friend Dr. Watson's ready for us. Let's go in and join him.
Oh, there you are, Mr. Bartell.
Good evening, Doctor. Say, where are the puppies this evening?
Mr. Bartell, don't you think it's about time you began to refer to them as the dogs? They're almost a year old, you know.
I stand corrected. Where are the dogs this evening?
Well, they had another furious battle with a dead seal on the beach today. My housekeeper, Mrs. West, is giving them a much-needed bath.
They certainly have an aversion to seals, don't they? Well, Doctor, are you all ready with tonight's new Sherlock Holmes adventure?
Yes, my boy, and as yesterday was St. Patrick's Day, I decided to tell you a story that took place in Ireland a few years before the turn of the century. I imagine that you've heard of kissing the Blarney stone, haven't you?
Oh, yes, Doctor, though I've never understood exactly what it meant.
Well, let me explain it to you, because the ceremony plays a very important part in the story tonight. Blarney Castle is an imposing 15th century ruin a few miles outside the town of Cork. The castle is many stories high, and in the foremost tower, the famous Blarney stone is situated.
What's supposed to be the point in kissing it, Doctor?
The stone is considered a powerful talisman, and the legend runs that whoever kisses it is endowed with eloquence for life.
Say, Doctor, if I ever get over to Ireland, I'll certainly kiss that stone. But You're such a storyteller yourself, Doctor. How about you've kissed it, huh?
No, Mr. Bartell. I'm afraid I never had quite enough courage.
Courage? Well, why does it need courage, Doctor?
Well, because the Blarney stone is set in a most inaccessible position on the outside wall. To kiss it, it is customary to lower the candidate for eloquence over the rampart, head foremost, with a friend hanging on to his heels.
From the top of a castle? It does sound dangerous, Doctor.
Oh, it was, my boy, so much so that in recent years a great row of iron spikes was put round the parapet to prevent an accident. Though, of course, at the time tonight's story took place, there was no such guard.
And I have a feeling that an accident did take place, Doctor?
No, Mr. Bartell, let me tell you the story from the beginning. Sherlock Holmes and I were staying in the city of Cork, where the great man had just solved the singular affair which the local press had referred to as the Leprechaun Murders. A few days before our departure for England, we paid a visit to Blarney Castle. I must confess that I had a certain desire to test the miraculous powers attributed to the Blarney Stone. I very soon changed my mind, however, as Holmes and I stood there, high on the turrets of Blarney Castle, and watched a terrified initiate being hauled up by his ankles and yelling at the top of his voice. Pull me up! Pull me up quickly! I think I'm going to faint! Great Scott, I had no idea that kissing the Blarney Stone was such a hazardous proceeding, Holmes.
Yes. It would seem that eloquence could be more easily obtained than by hanging suspended by one's ankles from a battlement with 100-foot drop below and kissing a piece of stone.
Oh, I'll never do that again. Oh, I'll never. I must say, I don't blame the fuller.
And yet, my dear chap, on our way over here, you expressed a sneaking desire to kiss the stone yourself. I'll be very happy to hold your ankles if you want to try the experiment.
No, thank you. After witnessing the ceremony, I've changed my mind.
Then I suggest we make our way back downstairs. I don't think there's much more to be seen up here.
Well, by the way, Holmes, do you know the origin of the superstition regarding the Blarney Stone?
Yes, I do, old chap. The stone was, the story of the stone dates back to the middle of the 15th century. A certain Cormac McCarthy, called the Strong, a descendant of the ancient kings of Munster and builder of this castle, chanced one day to save an old woman from drowning. In her gratitude, she offered Cormac a golden tongue, which would have the power to influence men and women, friends and foes, as he willed. She told him to mount the battlement, kiss a certain stone in the wall 5 feet below the gallery running round the top. He followed her directions and obtained all the fluent persuasiveness she had promised.
And I suppose the story spread and the Blarney Stone has been a magnet to pilgrims ever since.
Yeah, a pleasant legend.
Holmes.
Yes, old chap?
Tomorrow's St. Patrick's Day. I bet there'll be quite a bit of excitement in the village tonight. Don't you think it'd be rather fun to pay a visit to one of the local inns?
Splendid idea, old chap. Our rather arduous work here in Ireland is concluded, and I think we're more than entitled to a little gaiety.
In Dublin's fair city, the girl is so pretty. 'Twas there that I first met sweet Molly Malone. She wheeled her wheelbarrow.
Charming, quite charming. A waiter and singing at his work.
Singing very well, too. Just the same, I wish someone would come and take our order.
Oh, there's a barmaid. I'll see if I can catch her eye. Hi, Miss.
Would you gentlemen be after wanting something?
Yes, my dear. My friend and I would like a little refreshment, and what would you suggest?
What would I suggest, Your Honor? Oh, begorra. There's but one drink a gentleman like yourself should be after pouring down you, and that's the cream of Connemara. Whiskey that'll soften your heart and make you glow with a good feeling so that the little people will be after visiting you.
It sounds delightful. Bring 2 glasses, will you?
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, Your Honor. I must say I never heard an English barmaid go into such rhapsodies over a nip of whiskey.
No, the Irish are distinctly more colourful in their speech. It's an interesting fact, though, Watson, that the Irish are curiously unrewarding in the criminal world. England, Scotland, America, Australia have all produced classics of crime, but the Irish murders, almost without exception, have been purely physical, affairs of hot blood.
You say that rather regretfully, Holmes.
No, my dear chap, no. I say, Watson, look at this rather florid-looking gentleman coming towards our table.
It looks to me as if he's a little under the weather.
You fellas have got to have a drink with me.
Oh, thank you, sir, thank you, but we've just ordered one.
Well, you've got to have it with me. I went to the races at Cork today and made a killing. I'm going to buy all the drinks here tonight.
I'm afraid that...
Nothing to be afraid of. I'll sit down with you for a moment. There. My name's Hankin, Geoffrey Hankin. What's yours?
Mine is Holmes, and this is my friend, Dr. Watson.
How do you do,
sir? How do you do?
Your Honours, that'll be 1 and 6.
Here, I'm paying for these. Here. Half a crown, and you can keep the change.
Oh, blessings on you, Your Honour.
Oh, well, if you insist on paying for our drinks, Mr. Hankin, here's your very good health.
Yes, indeed.
You're both English, aren't you?
Yes, sir.
So am I, and it's certainly a relief to hear an English voice again.
Oh, you don't like the Irish lilt, sir?
Can't bear it.
Personally, I find it rather charming.
Yes, indeed, so do I.
Well, you wouldn't if you had to live with it all the time. Sometimes I think that if I hear one more Irish tenor singing Molly Malone, or one more reference to the little people, I shall go raving mad.
You live in Ireland, sir?
Yeah, I have to. I own a half interest in the Tweed mill here, you see. In any case, my wife's Irish, and she thinks there's no other country in the world, so I suppose I'm stuck here. See that couple sitting at the table over there?
You mean the fellow with the very beautiful girl?
Yes. The man's Michael Corcoran, my partner.
Oh, the girl's absolutely ravishing.
You'd like to meet her?
I'd like to, by George, yes. What do you say, Holmes?
Oh, very well, Watson. The combination of my natural curiosity and your taste for a pretty face would seem to suit the occasion admirably.
I might as well warn you, Doctor, that the pretty face belongs to my wife.
Your wife? Oh, good gracious me. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to...
Oh, well, you better bring your glasses with you. Molly, my dear, I want you to meet two English friends of mine, Mr. Holmes and Dr. Watson.
How do you do?
How do you do, Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson? Won't you sit down and join us?
And this is my partner, Michael Corcoran.
How do you do, Mr. Corcoran?
How do you do, sir?
I'm glad to meet you. Please be seated, gentlemen.
Are you visiting here in Cork, Mr.
Yes,
Holmes?
Mrs. Hankin, but we're returning to England in a few days.
You've been to Blarney Castle, I hope.
Oh, yes, we were there this afternoon.
And did either of you have the courage to kiss the Blarney Stone?
No, we didn't. I'm afraid it's an athletic feat that's beyond me.
It's a lot of rubbish, that's what it is. Kissing a slab of stone.
Have you the courage to do it, Geoffrey?
Well, of course I have, but I don't want to make a fool of myself. Where's the barmaid? Kathleen.
I'll make a wager, Geoffrey, that you haven't the courage to kiss the stone.
How much will you bet, Michael?
I'll wager a £10 note on it.
It's a bet, and you fellas witnessed it. I'll kiss the Blarney Stone at noon tomorrow, and you'll be £10 the poorer, Michael. And I suggest that Mr. Holmes and Dr. Watson be present as well. They can act as referees.
Geoffrey, dear, don't get so excited.
Well, I don't like it when Michael suggests I don't have courage.
You want some more drink, Mr. Henkin?
Yes, all of us want some.
No more for me, thank you, Mr.
No more for
and
me,
I
thank
think
you.
you've had enough, Geoffrey.
Don't tell me when I've had enough, Molly.
In Dublin's fair city, the girls
Oh, no,
are so
not that
pretty.
filthy song.
Firstly, Mr. Hankin, I find the traditional Irish melodies quite beautiful.
And I find them revolting.
Stop!
Geoffrey, quiet.
Would Your Honor be wanting me to sing another song?
My honor would like you to shut up that filthy caterwaul.
Really, sir, really. I call
Geoffrey.
that...
Sean, please go on with your singing.
In Dublin's fair city...
You heard me, you great bog-trotting gossoon. I said shut up, and I meant shut up!
Geoffrey, I'm leaving here at once. Michael, please to take me home.
It'll be my pleasure, Molly.
You're an ugly man, Mr. Henkin. Knocking down poor Sean when he was singing just like a bird.
Oh, the devil with him, and all of you.
No Irishman will be after forgiving you for this night's work. No, not the little people of old Ireland either. You've made more enemies, Mr. Henkin, than you'll ever see. But you'll be knowing they're there.
Fiddlesticks, you can't frighten me with your stupid Irish superstitions.
Well, bless my soul, that was a charming little party, I must say.
Englishmen like Hankin are a disgrace to their country. Fortunately, they're not representative, though.
Yes, I must say I'd hate to have a curse put on me like that barmaid laid on him.
Watson.
Yes?
Did you see the glances which Mr. Hankin's partner and his wife exchanged as the brawl started? There was more menace to him in those glances than in all the threats of all the little people in Ireland.
Yes. I thought that there was something between them. I say, Holmes, that bet about Hankin kissing the Blarney Stone at noon tomorrow, do you suppose...
I suppose nothing, old fellow. But there are forces at work here that I don't like. I think, Watson, that you and I will be at the Blarney Stone at noon tomorrow. It's possible that the bet made tonight is all part of a definite plan, and I have a feeling that the bet is still on. quite windy up here today, old fellow, at the top of the tower, isn't it?
Yes, it's just past noon. I wonder if that man Hankin is going to keep to the terms of his bet.
We shall soon learn. In the meanwhile, are you sure that you wouldn't like to change your mind and kiss the Blarney stone yourself?
I'm quite sure, thank you. Ah, here they come now.
Yes. Hankin and his partner, Mr. Corcoran. The bet is on, Watson. Good day to you, gentlemen.
Oh, hello. It's my friends from last night.
Well, I see you're going through with the bet, son.
Oh, yes. Geoffrey set his mind on the 10 pounds of mine.
Your wife didn't accompany you, Mr. Hankin?
No, she didn't. I'm afraid I'm rather in disgrace for my behavior last night. Molly made me go round and see that waiter fellow that I hit. I offered him money, but he wouldn't take it.
Did you offer him an apology?
Apologize? To a waiter? I should say not. Well, come on, let's get this stupid farce over with.
Are you sure your nerves can stand it, Geoffrey? There's a drop of 100 feet or more below you.
Oh, don't worry about me, Michael. Just hold on to my ankles tightly and don't let go. I'll climb onto the parapet. There we are. Now hold on to my feet, Michael, and lower me gently.
I'm holding you, Geoffrey.
Then lower away.
Right you are, Geoffrey.
Great Scott, I wouldn't do that for £100. Sliding head first down a vertical wall.
That's enough, Michael. I can reach the stone.
Oh, his boots. They're slipping through my fingers. I can't hold it.
Let me help you.
I'm slipping. Pull me.
Hold on to him. Hold on to him.
Oh, he's gone. I just couldn't hold him.
Great heavens. No man could survive that drop.
Mr. Corcoran, you deliberately let your partner slip to his death. This is murder.
But I don't understand. I'm a strong man. But he just vanished out of my hands like a greased pig.
Let me see your hands, Mr. Corcoran.
This is dreadful. Dreadful.
There's grease on your hands. Grease. And with a faint trace of boot blacking.
Good Lord, Holmes, that
it means,
that...
Watson, that someone, knowing that Hankin was going to kiss the Blarney stone, smeared his boots with grease so that he would slip out of the grasp of whoever was holding him. As clever a method of indirect long-distance murder as ever I've encountered.
You'll hear the remainder of Dr. Watson's story in just a second, so I'm going to remind you that Petri California Sherry is not only wonderful before dinner, but it's good almost any time. If you had to choose just one wine for almost any occasion, that wine would be Petri Sherry. Petri Sherry is a perfect wine to serve in the afternoon or in the evening. It's good before dinner, yes, but it's swell after dinner, too. In fact, with a bottle of Petri Sherry on your shelf, you've got practically a small-sized wine cellar. So get a bottle of Petri Sherry soon. And remember, you can't miss with any wine that has the letters Petri on the label, because all Petri wine is good wine. Well, Dr. Watson, this is quite a story you're telling us tonight. What happened next? I suppose you went down into the castle grounds and looked for the dead man's body?
Oh, we tried to, Mr. Bartell, but the authorities were curiously uncooperative. They refused to let us search, insisting that the police be called first. And so, Mr. Bartell, half an hour after the tragedy, Holmes and I found ourselves standing in a tiny police station as we told the story to the local sergeant.
Sure the saints be praised, Mr. Holmes. 'Tis a terrible story you've told me. Tomorrow I'll be after arresting Sean O'Flaherty.
Sean O'Flaherty? But he's the waiter at the inn, the one who sings.
That he is, and he sings like a breath of spring. I'll be sorry to see him hang.
But you've got no proof that he was responsible for the murder?
Proof, you say, sir? Well, I can't arrest a big manufacturing man like Mr. Corcoran, can I? Or a fine lady like Mrs. Hankin.
But you can't arrest a man without any evidence of guilt.
Oh, I can't I? Then supposing I tell you that Sean O'Flaherty cleans the boots at the hotel where Mr. Hankin was staying.
He does, eh? Then he had the perfect opportunity for the greasing of Hankin's boots this morning. And we know he had a motive for harming him.
You're right, sir. And from what I have heard of the dead man's behavior last night, half a dozen people could have heard him make the bet that he'd kissed the Blarney stone today. Sean O'Flaherty's our man. I'll have to arrest him tomorrow.
Tomorrow? But good heavens, man, aren't you going to do something today? A murderer's at large.
Today is blessed St. Patrick's Day. Oh, sure, let the poor fellow have the day in peace. Oh, he won't run away.
But my dear son... will you come back with me to the castle and search for the body? They refuse to let me do it alone.
On St. Patrick's Day? That I will not. We would need a crew of helpers, and where will I be after getting them on the blessed St. Patrick's Day? No, we'll do that tomorrow, too. No, today is a day for celebrating.
Oh, your methods astound me, Sergeant.
Do they now, sir? Don't be after fretting about me. Just enjoy yourself today. Tomorrow we'll see what can be done about it. Well, good day to you, gentlemen.
Oh, bless my soul. I've never seen such a happy-go-lucky policeman in my life.
It's infuriating. If only I were allowed to examine Hankins' body, I could get to the bottom of this.
Well, what are you going to do now, Holmes?
The police won't help us. Then we must take the law into our own hands. I think we'll start off by going to the hotel and seeing what we can find out from Sean O'Flaherty.
I was going to Ballymure a day, I well remember, for to view the lads and lasses on the 5th day of November with a murring do a day and a murring a do a daddy. Oh, your honours would be after speaking to me, Sean O'Flaherty, perhaps?
Yes, Sean. Did you know that Mr. Hankin, the man who struck you last night, was dead?
Dead? Well, if ever a man deserved to be beneath the sod, 'twas Geoffrey Hankin himself. A mean, ugly man. The saints be praised that he's gone. How did he die, sir?
He was murdered.
Murdered? Well, bedad, I'm not surprised to hear it. Who murdered him, sir?
At the moment, the police seem to think that you are the culprit.
Myself? Well, how would I be after murdering the man, sir, when I don't even know how he died?
He died when he fell from the top of Blarney Castle as he was trying to kiss the stone.
He fell because Mr. Corcoran, his partner, couldn't hold on to his feet. His boots had been greased.
And we know that you have been cleaning his boots, Sean.
That I have, sir. I cleaned them this very morning. But I put no grease on them, if that's what you'd be after suggesting.
I'm suggesting nothing. I'm trying to establish a few facts. Do you know Kathleen, the barmaid?
Oh, and why shouldn't I know her, sir? She's to be me wife before the winter sets in.
She pronounced a curse on the dead man last night, just after he had knocked you down. It's possible that she met...
Here she comes, huh?
Sean, my darling, what are the fine gentlemen doing here?
Oh, Kathleen. They've come to ask me questions about the death of Mr. Hankin. He fell off Blarney Castle today and got himself murdered, they say.
The saints be praised. But what has that to do with you, my darling?
Well, the gentlemen tell me that the village police think that I might have greased his boots so that he slipped to his death.
The village police is as stupid as my father's big sow. If Mr. Hankin fell to his death today because his boots were greased, I can tell you who did it.
Indeed, who?
The little people. I warned Mr. Hankin last night that the little people would be after him. He insulted the Irish.
Oh, come, my dear. You don't seriously expect us to believe in the little people?
And why not, Your Honor? We have them here. Oh, there be those that say the fairies all be dead, but I know different. I've seen them. When I was a slip of a girl, close to where I lived, there was a rath. That's a fort, you know. And the rath was a fairy's fort. We never dared touch it with a spade or cut down a tree growing on it or carry away a stone. We'd put our ear to the ground at night and we could hear the fairy music rising up from under the ground. Ah, they're gentle people. Most of the time. But they'd grease the boots of a man like Mr. Hankin if they didn't like them. That they would, Your Honor.
Holmes, I'm certain that we're wasting our time here.
I feel so, Watson. And get the whole thing turned on the greasing of those boots. If only I could have the boots in my hands. If only I could make laboratory tests. But until that dolt of a police... But of course! I have it, Watson.
You have what, Holmes?
The answer, I hope. Get hold of Mrs. Hankin and Mr. Corcoran. Have them meet me in the Blarney Stone Tower in half an hour.
And you, where are you going?
To the police station to try and convince the sergeant that even though it's St. Patrick's Day, it's his duty to help me trap a murderer.
Do you know, Mr. Holmes, you're an obstinate man. It's blessed St. Patrick's Day, and yet you insist that we meet here on the top of Blarney Castle. What do you think you can prove?
Who murdered Geoffrey Hankin?
But why do Molly and I have to be here?
Yes, Mr. Holmes. And poor Geoffrey's body still lying somewhere below us.
Mrs. Hankin and Mr. Corcoran. I asked Dr. Watson to bring you here for a good reason, I assure you. You ready, Watson?
Quite ready, Holmes.
Good. Sergeant.
Yes, sir.
You asked me why I've assembled the three of you here. I'm going to reconstruct the crime. I shall play the part of the victim. My friend Dr. Watson will represent you, Mr. Corcoran. Now, I straddle the parapet. So. Watson, hold on to my feet, will you?
I've got him, Holmes.
And lower me down the face of the wall.
Right, sure. Holmes, hold tight to the wall. Try and push yourself back. The murderer's tried to get you. Your boots are covered in grease.
Marty, stand back. Come away.
Grab my trouser legs, Watson.
I've got him, Holmes. Come, up you come. There we go. Oh, Joe, that was a near thing.
Devilish plot, Sergeant, and very cleverly carried out. My boots were ungreased when I entered the castle, and yet someone has been able to apply grease to them without my knowledge within the last few minutes.
Sure, and how is that possible, sir?
I don't know, Sergeant, I must confess.
Holmes, you stumbled as you came up the darkened staircase. Do you remember that?
That's true, old chap, I'd forgotten. And you, Mrs. Hankin, and you, Mr. Corcoran, were kind enough to assist me to my feet. An excellent opportunity to apply the grease. Now we know that one of you two is the murderer. I must have a jar of grease somewhere. Sergeant, will you search the lady while I search Mr. Corcoran?
But this is ridiculous.
Of course it is. How could we be guilty?
Well, if you're not guilty, you've got no objection to being searched, madam.
Upon my word, here in your purse, Mrs. Hankin, is a jar of grease.
What?
Now, what have you to say for yourself?
What can't you say, Sergeant? Except that she engineered her husband's murder and tried to engineer mine.
Oh, no, I knew nothing about Geoffrey's murder. Oh, Michael, darling, I swear to you.
Don't worry, my darling. I'll not let them hurt you. I'm telling you, you're wrong, Mr. Holmes. I was the murderer.
Oh, no, Michael. You mustn't sacrifice yourself for me.
I think this little play acting has gone far enough. Mr. Corcoran, you have just offered us what you think we will accept as a false confession. But I've established the one thing I wish to know, that you love your late partner's wife and she you.
I'm proud to admit that, Mr. Holmes. And now that she's a widow, I can say it in the open. But what are you implying?
That you murdered your partner.
But the grease on your own boots, sir. I just found a jar of it in Mrs. Hankin's handbag.
Oh, that, my dear Sergeant, was all part of my little plan. As to the grease on my boots, I confess I placed it there myself. Just as I planted the jar of grease in your bag, Mrs.
But why,
Hankin.
Holmes?
A fraud accomplished two ends. It forced you, Mr. Corcoran, into a betrayal of your love. But what was more important, it proved from what Dr. Watson's natural reactions were that a man holding the greased boots could not fail to realize that fact at once. You brazenly committed murder before our very eyes, Mr. Corcoran, hoping to appear as an innocent victim of another's plot.
Your theory is an ingenious one, Mr. Holmes, but how can you prove it? I can claim that my hands are unusually insensitive, not the delicate fingers of a doctor like your friend.
Yes, he's right, sir. How can you prove it?
When, with your kind cooperation, Sergeant, we find the body of Mr. Hankin and examine it, I shall study his boots. If the grease was applied at the hotel, as it would have been if Sean O'Flaherty had done it, the boots will reveal dust from the walk here. If there is no dust, the grease must have been applied as you grasped your partner's boots with grease-smeared hands, Mr. Corcoran. You should know best what my tests will reveal.
Grab him, Sergeant. Grab him. He's
Come back.
heading for that
Come back.
turret.
Oh, Michael, don't! Please don't!
Goodbye, Molly, me darling.
No!
Great Scotty. He jumped off the parapet.
Now, Mr. Holmes, you can see that I was right, sir. Wasn't I?
What do you mean, Sergeant?
In waiting until tomorrow to get the search party. Now we can be after finding both bodies at the one time.
Well, Doctor, that was really an unusual story.
Even now I get a bit of a shudder when I think of that afternoon at the castle.
I don't blame you. Doctor, you know something? Earlier this evening, I said that if I ever got to Ireland, I'd certainly want to kiss the Blarney stone, remember?
Yeah?
Well, I've changed my mind. I'd no more want to hang by my heels to kiss that stone than, well, just let's forget it.
But, my boy, don't forget if you kiss that stone, you get the gift of eloquence. You'd be the most convincing fellow in the world.
So?
So, well, whenever you talked about Petri wine, you'd really do people a favor because they wouldn't be able to resist trying it.
Oh, talking about Petri wine isn't important, Doctor. The best way to determine just how good Petri wine really is to taste it. One sip and there's all the proof you need. That's because the Petri family has developed the art of winemaking to a truly fine point. They've been making wine for generations. And all of the things the Petri family knows about turning luscious, sun-ripened grapes into fragrant, delicious wine have been handed on down in the family from father to son, from father to son. That's why whenever you want a swell wine, for any occasion, you can't go wrong with a Petri wine, because Petri took time to bring you good wine. Well, Dr. Watson, what new Sherlock Holmes story are you planning to tell us next week?
Well, now, let me see. Next week, Mr. Bartell, I'm going to tell you a story in which that arch-criminal Professor Moriarty played a most important part. It deals with the theft of a famous painting, of a strange night that Sherlock Holmes and I spent trapped in the interior of a giant metal vault, and of mysterious bloodstains in an empty room.
Tonight's Sherlock Holmes adventure was written by Dennis Green and Anthony Boucher and was suggested by an incident in this Arthur Conan Doyle story, A Case of Identity. Music is by Dean Fosler. Mr. Rathbone appears through the courtesy of Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, and Mr. Bruce through the courtesy of Universal Pictures, where they are now starring in the Sherlock Holmes series. The Petri Wine Company of San Francisco, California, invites you to tune in again next week, same time, same station. Sherlock Holmes comes to you from our Hollywood studios. This is Harry Bartell saying goodnight for the Petri family.